Scott did not have a great game last weekend, and your chair throwing abilities might be of great interest to Jerry Jones as he's thinking about who's going to be in the pocket next season. I'd just say I wouldn't rule out your career options.
I appreciate that, Jonathan.
I'd love Cheryl to kind of bring you in. You know, Rabbi Charlie was so kind to mention the training he got from ADL. And again, it's humbling to do that. Can you talk a little bit about the training that you've done, Sharon, the education work that you've done, at Congregation Beth Israel and in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and Texas generally?
Of course, Jonathan. And I too am deeply touched to learn that Rabbi Charlie credits even ADL for a little part of his survival on Saturday. And the training comes in many forms. A lot of which has evolved over the years, and Rabbi Charlie and his congregation has had a long time relationship with ADL. So some of that direct security work that he's talking about isn't in ADL's wheelhouse today, but that mantra that you have a relationship with law enforcement, that you take security training seriously, is a conversation that I have with all of the rabbis in our community, including Rabbi Charlie, on a regular basis. Today, that work with ADL is in collaboration with whether it's SCN or federations who use CSI, CSS, to really provide an awareness of the emerging threats to a local Jewish community and to coordinate appropriate safety protocols. As I've shared, and I've had the opportunity to worship at Congregation Beth Israel, Rabbi Charlie doesn't open a service without going through security protocol. It may not be the most exciting opening you've ever heard to worship, but it's incredibly practical and it's a lot of muscle memory for the entire congregation. And I attend a lot of services and I can tell you, I don't see it everywhere. And we urge people to be in relationship with law enforcement. I can tell you from spending the day on the ground in what turned into snow flurries in Texas that afternoon, everyone knows Rabbi Charlie. There is no one who walked through a room, a building. When I rode up the elevator at City Hall to meet with the mayor, the person working the elevator said, you're here to help Rabbi Charlie? I love Rabbi Charlie. This person absolutely, he's an entity and a connector in his own community. With respect to law enforcement training, and something that we're really proud of the work we're doing in Texoma and my colleagues across the country, We are the leading non-governmental provider of education and professional development to law enforcement. LEAS, or virtual LEAS, which Director Wray referred to, every FBI agent and analyst is required to attend that training program. And as I was standing at Good Shepherd Catholic Church, looking down the street, basically at the congregation, and then where law enforcement was, the team that came in from Quantico that we've all heard about and was so instrumental, they were all trained in that program in taking the lessons of the Holocaust and applying them as members of law enforcement to the work that they do. Anti-Semitic training. Rabbi Charlie has been well aware that his congregation needed to be well voiced in anti-Semitism. He's brought our Words to Action program to his teens. He's brought programs about anti-Semitism on campus to his congregation for parents and grandparents whose biggest question is, when we choose a college, what's that going to be like? How do I make a toolbox so that my child or grandchild can be successful in an environment where they don't have me holding their hand? The Federation of Tarrant County pre-COVID funded a series that Rabbi Charlie did with ADL, focusing on all aspects of hate and anti-Semitism. It was really a tremendous community program. Again, having people practice that muscle memory of how to call anti-Semitism every single time they see it.
That's great, Cheryl. Thank you for that. Very comprehensive and helpful. I guess I want to ask you one more question. We're getting a lot in the chat, suffice to say. But I just want to ask, and this, you know what, Cheryl, this is for you or for Rabbi Charlie. At the grassroots level, okay? I mean, look, it's interesting. We're talking this month, and it's almost 7 years to the day of the shooting at the kosher supermarket in Paris. And we know last May, around the fighting in Gaza, kosher restaurants were vandalized all over Los Angeles. Whether it's restaurants or supermarkets or synagogues or JCCs or Federation offices, I mean, we can never keep everyone safe enough. So like at the ground level, like what else do you think, what would your thoughts be on what we can do as a community to protect ourselves and our neighbors, to make sure nothing like this ever happens again? That's for either of you.
I'll jump first, but I'm pretty sure that Rabbi is going to have better ideas than I do. If I had the magic recipe, Jonathan, you know I would have put us out of business a long time ago if I could shut this down.
Right.
But building bridges. I think building bridges with other people in the community so we know them before we're in crisis. I saw that working beautifully on Saturday. People weren't introducing themselves for the first time. People were supporting one another. Spending time outside our own echo chambers, hearing ideas that are different from our own, and speaking up when we see hate and demanding that others do the same. I can't tell you how much outreach I've received from around the country, the greater ADL family who want the Dallas or Fort Worth paper to see the coverage and feel like their local media or even national media may not be paying enough attention. I urge them to let their station know, let their newspaper know, if they didn't get adequate attention on anti-Semitism, speak up, say something about it. And maybe a little Pollyanna, but I think doing something good for someone else. Acts of kindness can be just as contagious as acts of hate. And we should do our very best to spread them whenever we can. And I'll turn it over to Rabbi.
I would say ditto. Ditto to amen and amen to all of that. And just the thing that I want to understand and acknowledge is that, again, because I know that there have been some questions, right, about smaller congregations, right? How can smaller congregations do security, right? And right, those bridges matter. All of those resources are really important. The connections, the relationships. I mean, they truly are so important. And at the same time, right, smaller congregations just aren't going to have the resources to be able to do everything all the time. There's always decisions that are going to have to be made. And that's why I'd say that the importance of every synagogue, not just every synagogue, but having that plan in place, having a sense of what the goal is, and how to respond, in not just in terms of, right, God forbid, right, these kinds of moments, but even in terms of what happens in case of a tornado or a fire, right? All of that is really important, and to use and utilize the resources like the ADL, like SCN, and so many more that are there to support us.
Terrific. Thank you for that. Yeah, I don't know what to say other than, again, I feel touched to know that ADL training helped. I feel heartened to know that our friends at SCAN gave you support. And I think there's just a lot of gratitude. So, Deb, there are so many questions. As you open it up, I just want to mention one thing. The ADL has a partnership with the Union of Reform Judaism. We are working actively with Rabbi Rick Jacobs, Rabbi Jonah Pesner, and everyone in the leadership of the Reform movement. So, Rabbi Charlie, we are working directly to make sure that synagogues like yours and all Reform shuls, and by the way, we also have a partnership with the conservative movement, working on the Reconstructionist movement, talking to folks in the Orthodox movement, to be able to provide our services, our support to anyone in the Jewish community who wants it. So that's one thing I know that we are doing at ADL. Okay, Deb, over to you.
Well, first, Jonathan, you did not undersell it. We've been doing these programs for almost 2 years, and I have literally never seen the chat as active as it is today. They're coming in so fast, it's hard to even read them. But that said, I will say that there are two very distinct themes that are overwhelmingly the questions that are coming in. And the first is absolute gratitude for your safety and well-being. And that is number one. And in addition to asking the question of how folks can get this training. And I know that we have touched on this, but Cheryl, I'm going to turn to you and ask you to be as specific as possible to say, if folks have questions about how their synagogue or how their community center can get this kind of training and find these resources, there's questions about educational resources, all sorts of things. Where should they be going? How do they get that information?
They should reach out to their local ADL office. And if they don't know that ADL office, they can go to our website and email the general mailbox, and they will get assigned. And one of my colleagues around the country will be thrilled to reach out to them and dive deep and look at the relationships and opportunities in every individual community, because they're all honestly slightly different, but they're all available, and we are happy. It's our privilege to get to be that connector.
Thank you, Cheryl. I think that's very true. It is absolutely our privilege to do this work, and it's moments like this where it feels especially resonant. So, Rabbi Charlie, another question I'm seeing a bunch of is, what are the next steps for your community? How will you help them process this? How do we help the community get through this and hopefully grow from the experience?
Well, first of all, I'm sorry that we're not going to be able to get to all of the questions. I have a hard time saying no as far as that goes, right? Like, I would want to be able to answer all of them. But as far as what comes next, it's going to be one step at a time for us. We are doing the best we can to heal. We are doing, we're going to have services on Shabbat evening. We're going to have services on Shabbat morning. We're going to have religious school on Sunday. And we already had, a beautiful healing service on Monday night that was so meaningful to actually see people, to be able to hug people. It's been so hard. It's been so overwhelming. I haven't been able to respond even to, all of the texts and messages and emails. There's a lot, but it's one step at a time, right? We are gonna get through this together, and that's what. We have trauma specialists and great resources. I had a great conversation with our Jewish Family Services, both of our therapists through JFS. That was very helpful to me. I'm getting the care that I need. I'm trying to make sure that I take care of my family. And at the same time, right, one of those pieces that we're going to have to get past is that sense of fear, right? There was something traumatic that happened within the congregation. And we know that it's not just our congregation that feels that sense of fear. It's something that is a lot of people, and a lot of Jewish people in particular, right? Our people, right, are living in with a sense of fear because of these kinds of events. And I just want to stress that, you know, after thousands and thousands of services that I've led, this was the first time that this happened, right? This is not an everyday occurrence. It's not a usual thing. And that we want to do all the prep work that we can, but at the same time, we want to be able to go to services and pray and be together, because one of the most important things is to be with. One another within that sense of community. That's needed right now more than anything else.
I think that's very true. And it's a scary world we live in right at this moment. So my next question, I think probably has a little bit of question for both Rabbi Charlie and for you, Cheryl. And it's a question of other anti-Semitism that's been in the area prior to this event. Obviously, what happened over the weekend is an extreme example of anti-Semitism. But Rabbi Charlie, can you speak to if you've noticed any other kinds of incidents or anything along those lines that's been apparent within your community? And Cheryl, maybe you can speak to sort of a broader trend in that community and the environs.
Well, I would say that there has been a little, and when I say a little, I mean like over the course of, you know, so many years. Right? There are incidents that happen in schools from things that are inconvenient, lack of respect for Jewish holidays, those kinds of things, to actual incidents where Jewish students, you know, have been targeted. But we really haven't had anything that was overwhelming. We were able to respond on a point-by-point kind of basis. And it was so random for this guy to, you know, to come to America to target our synagogue because he thought it was the closest synagogue to where this person was being held. This is not the kind of thing that we see or experience every day or any day, right? Except for this past Saturday. And Cheryl, I mean, again, a lot of my members, when we've had those incidents, have turned to you. So if you can please share and add.
Sure. You know, the data tells us, Deb, that North Texas in the last year saw an increase in anti-Semitic incidents, about 127% actually of the 2020 numbers over 2019. But but those incidents clearly were not anything like this. And when we look at themes, I think that we see that the normalization of any kind of hate, and particularly anti-Semitism, matters. When things go unnoticed or unreported, Rabbi Charlie and so many of his colleagues around the Metroplex have been such amazing partners in encouraging people to report. So part of me wants to think that some of those higher numbers are the actually active ability of people saying, hey, I'm not going to let this one pass. I'm actually going to turn it in, even though I dealt with the teacher or dealt with the administrator or the employer on it. I'm not going to brush it under the rug. We have seen, and I know we've talked about with our ADL family, Holocaust denial as a form of anti-Semitism. For those of you who watch the news and are just learning Metroplex geography, you know that the South Lake Carroll district is very close to Colleyville. And so for sure, some of those conversations that we have about whether there are alternative views to the Holocaust, which Rabbi Charlie partnered with me on in really addressing directly with the school board. There is a name for an alternative view to the Holocaust, and that name is anti-Semitism. And we were incredibly clear with the community about where we stand, but for sure, was there foreshadowing for an event like this, Deb? The answer is a hard no.
Thank you both for those answers. I think the other most popular question is if this call is being recorded, and the answer is yes, and it will be sent to you in the follow-up along with the variety of materials that have been mentioned here today. So rest assured, we will make sure that you have that information. Another popular question has been, what can folks do? And so I'm going to ask my colleague Sasha to drop a link into the chat. And what you can do is you can tell Congress to secure our houses of worship and religious institutions. You can text safeguard to 52886 or go to the link that is down there in the chat. And you can be connected to your member of Congress and tell them to increase funding for the nonprofit security grant program. And again, this information will also be included in a follow-up email. But so folks feel comfortable knowing that we do have an action for you to take. It's one that's important. We know that this kind of work makes the difference. And so we ask you to take a moment to do that. All right. So this next question is something that I've also wondered, and I'll give it to both of you, which is, how should we respond to people, to congregants, to students on college campuses who say they're afraid to wear a yarmulke, a kippah, or who say they're afraid to wear a Star of David or anything that shows that they are outwardly Jewish? What should we tell them to do? Should we tell them to hide? Should we tell them to be proud of their Jewish heritage in this climate of rising anti-Semitism? Either of you. Rabbi, please.
No, I would say that people need to do what they're good with. I started wearing a yarmulke before rabbinical school. I was the assistant director of a small soup kitchen in Amherst, Massachusetts. And I had a volunteer come in, and I was so excited. I was going to rabbinical school. He was Jewish. He was wearing a yarmulke. And I said, you know, I assume you're Orthodox. And he's like, no. I just thought, you know, why not give it a try? You know, why not, you know, be outward about my Judaism? And this was a long time ago. This was over 20 years ago. But at the same time, the idea that our Judaism is a part of us and that we own it. I've worn a yarmulke in our community, and I've never gotten a negative response, at least that I'm aware of, right? And I get a lot of I get a lot of positivity. That's not necessarily the case everywhere in the country, and it really depends on who you are and what your comfort level is. It's certainly just like, right, we have in the Talmud that you don't light Hanukkah candles and put them in the window during times of danger. And I don't think that this is I don't believe, in spite of the increase in anti-Semitism, that this is necessarily a time of danger. I continue to wear my yarmulke proudly. But I also wear my yarmulke because it's a part of who I am. It's part of my relationship with God. And it's part of my, an aspect of my understanding of my relationship with my people. It's really up to you. And I would hope and I would pray that we're able to get past a sense of fear. And at the same time, we all have to go through our own process on this.
Thank you, Rabbi. Cheryl?
I'll ditto Rabbi on that. I think it's important that we meet people where they are. I think that it's important that we validate their concerns and not dismiss them. But I'll tell you, I must have gotten 25 phone calls late in the evening, Saturday evening, from various communities around the Metroplex, parents asking, should they send their kids to religious the following morning? And while I can't make the decision for any other parent, I definitely dropped my kids off because I believe in the community. I believe in the security measures, and I believe that being together is really important in times like this.
Thank you, Cheryl. Jonathan, you wanted to say a few words of thanks?
I will just say, if I might, I agree with what Rabbi Charlie and Cheryl said, but I just want to say this loud and clear. Like, I won't be able to quote it chapter and verse. Charlie, you can, I'm sure. But I think, there's that psalm about everyone under their own fig tree, right? And not being afraid. Maybe you can help me to get that. Do you know that? I don't know it by heart, so that I can say it correctly.
There's certainly that notion of messianic redemption, right? That we are hoping and we are praying that we will all one day be able to sit under our vine and fig tree, and with that beautiful notion that our world can be a world of peace and harmony. And it's that's certainly my prayer as well. We're not there yet, but God willing, someday.
Someday. So look, I believe all of us should be able to sit under that vine and fig tree here in America. I will be at Shul on Saturday morning. I hope all of you will be at Shul on Saturday morning. We should not be afraid. You need to go. You need to be where you are. But I will tell you, this organization exists, and our counterparts exist because we should not be afraid. We should be able to worship with the same privileges and rights as every other community, and not be intimidated or bullied by anyone. With that being said, the best way to make sure that we can be ourselves and we can be proud is get involved. Whether it's in your federation, whether it's in your synagogue, whether it's in your local JCC, whether it's in ADL. Like, the best way to build the beloved community is to do it with our own bare hands. So I would encourage everyone to, in a way that you're comfortable, show up for Shul, get engaged. And if I might, like, even by being here today, I think everybody was showing up in a way. Once again, thank you, Cheryl, for your extraordinary work over this last 96 hours. It has been nonstop. I'm grateful for you and everyone on your team, which you do every single day for ADL. I want to thank again Director Wray for the leadership, the heroism of the FBI, and I particularly want to thank you, Rabbi Charlie, for your extraordinary courage. All of us are glad you're with us today. All of us, I think, are literally humbled by your humility. And, kol hakavod. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers today. This was really an extraordinary conversation. We have one more action that you can also take, and that's to help confirm Deborah Lipstadt as the U.S. Special Envoy to monitor and combat anti-Semitism. We're going to drop a link for that in the chat as well, and we'll also put that in our follow-up materials. Again, thank you, Rabbi Charlie, for choosing to spend time with ADL. We know you have not yet done many appearances within the Jewish community, and we are humbled and honored that you chose to do this with ADL. Cheryl, I'll echo Jonathan, and I know all of my colleagues at ADL, thank you. Thank you for the extraordinary work that you do every day, and especially for the work that you have done in the last 5 days. It's quite something, and I think we all can imagine, if we don't already know, it takes a huge toll, and we thank you for that. And last, I'd like to thank all of you, everyone who took time to join us today to make this our largest Fighting Hate from Home call to date, and certainly our most populated chat. And I should let folks know that now the chat is going crazy with lots and lots of thank yous. And so we are just so deeply appreciative of all of you for being here with us today. And with that, that concludes our call. Keep an eye on your inbox for a follow-up email that includes a link to this presentation, as well as how to Tell your senators to support the security grants program and to urge them to confirm Deborah Lipstadt. And we will also be sending you, of course, an invitation to next month's Fighting.
My name is Adrian Guerrero, General Director of Public Affairs with Union Pacific Railroad. I want to thank everybody for joining us here today. Over the past week, Union Pacific has been working with our police force, with our engineering, with our operating workforce, and I want to start off with a huge thanks to our workforce who's been working through this over the past year on rail theft. In addition to that, I want to focus on the message today of partnership in action. Union Pacific put out a call to action with our public partners, law enforcement partners at LAPD, LA County Sheriff's Office, and CHP, and they were the first to respond. We worked directly with the governor's office as this issue continued to increase, and they were the first ones to offer their services and drive solutions and ideas to a three-prong approach focused on police, law enforcement, technology, infrastructure solutions, and criminal justice. All of that combined is what's going to help us move forward on this issue. And again, if there's one thing I want to leave you with today, it's the focus of partnership in action. And I want to thank each and every one of our public partners who are here today, starting with the governor, with Caltrans, California Highway Patrol, our important customers at UPS, County Supervisor Hilda Solis. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Bruce McCrae, Vice President of U.S. State Government Affairs with UPS.
Hi, everybody. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. And I look back, our governor got the call, our governor responded. Our supervisor got the call, supervisor responded. The CHP got the call, the CHP responded. You know, we need an effective solution to handle this. And we're reaching out to both federal, state, county, and city law enforcement agencies so they can truly get the perpetrators of this and hold them accountable. I read you a quote from the head of our security and our legal. UPS will remain engaged to help ensure our customers' goods are safe. That's our commitment. So with that, I'd like to introduce my friend and our supervisor, Hilda Solis.
Thank you. It's a pleasure and honor to be here alongside with the governor who, when he calls, he not only calls, but he puts us to work. And his action means words. They're more than just words. Actually, look behind us. This place was filthy, and it's an embarrassment. And I'm proud to stand with all of our partners here today to see that we clean California. That's the program that the governor instituted, and we are a big part of. This isn't the first time I've been out with you, Governor. We've cleaned up other alleys down by Adams and Grand, and we cleaned a section of a Caltrans property, and now it's a public park for people. So we can do good things when we get the message, and we have resources and we have leadership like the governor, Caltrans, UP, Union Station, CHP, all of our friends. Brevemente en español, estamos aquí para limpiar la ciudad, el condado, trabajando juntos con el gobernador. Él tiene un programa que se llama Limpieza de California y está dando fondos y ayuda de parte de los departamentos de Caltrans, todo el condado y diferentes departamentos que también ya no quieren ver la basura, ya no quieren ver las personas robando medicinas, cosas que deben de ir a otras áreas, no solamente en California, pero en otras partes de Estados Unidos. Entonces estamos aquí para apoyar a él, este programa, y me da bastante gusto estar aquí con él. Next, I'm very happy to introduce Charlie Sampson, who represents CHP. He's been a partner with us for the county and the state, and we appreciate him being here. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, ma'am. First of all, I'd like to thank Union Pacific on that coin when he said partnership in action, because that's exactly what it is. I couldn't have said it better. And the leadership of the governor, I've been fortunate to be a part of his support to public safety up and down the state. I just got back from the Bay Area where I spent the last year and a half, and he's done some tremendous work with the local agencies up there, and then he's bringing it down here, and I get to see it firsthand with this partnership with Union Pacific and our allied partners as we're going forward to police some of the issues that we're having here with the thefts. We're looking at it multiple layers. We're looking at it from an investigative background. We're looking at it from a policing background. We're looking at it from a partner sharing information background, not only with Union Pacific, with UPS, and all our private stakeholders. That's the only way that we effectively do that. That's the reason why we've had so much success in our recent retail crimes task force up and down the state, because it's that private sector relationship that really builds the momentum in finding out what is actually happening and how these thefts are happening to stop it. So I'm excited about this. I was excited about the programs in the Bay Area. I'm excited about this program. I'm looking forward to seeing what it looks like going forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for taking the time to be here. First of all, I want to start off in thanking our Caltrans team. There are more than 50 men and women in orange vests that have been out here all morning since 6 o'clock this morning in partnership with UPS to help clean up this right-of-way that you see out here today. So a major thanks to our Caltrans team, the men and women wearing orange vests. I call them our ambassadors because at Caltrans, those are the first people that you will run into. Next, I want to thank Adrian and the folks at UP and UPS as well. Bruce, thanks for being here. Appreciate the partnership, as you mentioned, and action. Thanks for allowing us to be a part of it, to help make a difference, here. Supervisor Hollis, thank you as well for the continued partnership and all the work. Charlie at CHP, you and the commissioner, you guys and your team, you guys have always been there right alongside us to make sure we can help get things done for the people of the state. But just as important, a major thanks to the governor for all the work that he's doing across the state in many avenues, but in particular, this particular issue. Clean California is an initiative that he started just 8 or 9 months ago, and he's been pushing us at Caltrans to see how we can take this effort to the next level. Look, it's a $1.1 billion multi-year initiative to transform the right-of-way and the public spaces and spaces like this across the state. To date, more than 5,600 tons, since the program has started, more than 5,600 tons of debris and trash and litter has been moved. You're wondering what that means? Roughly 103 Olympic-sized swimming pools. That's how much litter Caltrans, our team, has been involved in moving just since the Clean California program has started. We've hired more than 500 people, 250 people right here in the LA area alone. Some of those 250 people are some of the 50 people, men and women that you see out here today. There's a lot more work to be done. We still have a lot of spaces across the state that we need to address, and we at Caltrans, we're going to be all over it. But the other part that the governor has been leading the way on for the country is the supply chain challenge that we've had. As UP and UPS has been working on all the shippers to move goods across the state of California and to move goods to other parts of the country, the governor's asked us, CalSTA, to step up and be a part of the solutions to address this backlog. And if we continue to have issues like this, that backlog is going to continue to exist. Till to date, we have given nearly 50 permits to shippers to do additional loading on their trucks, up to 88,000 pounds of loading on their trucks, so they can get goods quicker from the ships and ports that are backed up. And we'll continue our efforts to partner with shippers and movers across the state to alleviate that backlog on the supply chain. So I just want to thank the governor again for his leadership, not sitting back and taking action with an issue like this, Clean California, the supply chain challenge issue. His leadership has been absolutely stellar to help us get to where we need to get to. So with that, please welcome the governor of our great state, Governor Newsom. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me thank everybody behind me, but as Toke said, let me in particular thank all the men and women in orange and yellow for their outstanding work and for moving quickly. I mean, just it was less than 48 hours ago, we said we're coming down, let's set this thing up. We had all the lawyers say, well, hold on, it's not your property. If you get injured, I mean, every conceivable thing that makes you frustrated and crazy about government and bureaucracy was at play, but everybody worked together. They worked through those issues. We got this memorandum of understanding, and we created a new framework of understanding about our mutual responsibility to address what the hell's going on here. And I say that with emphasis. I see what you see, I see what you've been covering, I see what everybody's seen, and asking myself, what the hell is going on? I mean, look like a third world country, these images, the drone images that were on the nightly news, day in and day out. Some networks weaponizing them for their own, political agenda, and others just reporting the damn news, fairly and appropriately. And all I can say is we need, all of us, to recognize our collective and individual responsibility to do more and start supporting one another to address these issues. And so I'm very grateful that Adrian's here and his team, and some of the folks back from Omaha came out, Union Pacific, which I'm grateful they took the time to be here. I'm very grateful to our incredible partnership with UPS and Bruce's remarkable leadership. You heard from Hilda Solis. She immediately dropped everything, came out here, said, hey, the county needs to be more supportive of these efforts, more collaborative. We pointed out, as an example, one of the county-owned buildings right behind us that's abandoned, what we can do to secure that, what we can do with the encampments around here, how we can get the fencing fixed here, how we could support the efforts of UP and others to get more trespassing technology here, to provide more collaborative intelligence data gathering as it relates to what's going on cross-jurisdictionally as it relates to movement and criminal activity. And just mark my words, this is not one-off. This is organized theft. These are organized gangs of people that are coming out, and forgive me for saying gangs. I know that's not a pejorative. They're organized groups of folks that move from site to site. When there's more attention, a bright light on one site, they move to the next site. A lot of these folks are arrested as if they're individuals that are not connected to the whole. And we need to change that. And that's why I'm particularly grateful that Chief Sampson's here with our organized retail theft task force to create a new construct of understanding about how organized these groups actually are. And to share that information in real time so that we can hold people to account. Not just arrest folks, though we must, but do the investigation work. That's the hard work. It's not just arrest and walk away. You got to do the work and then present the case and see folks prosecuted and see their lives turned around. But there's nothing, we're not condoning this behavior. There's nothing acceptable about this behavior. That's why we put together this organized retail theft task force. And it was over 6 months ago I announced in Northern California its expansion. We announced our budget down in Long Beach, our investments that would be unprecedented to not only support the expansion, but support additional efforts, including getting the AG's office to have a new unit at the Department of Justice focused exclusively on this. That's one of the budget recommendations we've made to the legislature. We want to move on that. Hundreds of millions of dollars of law enforcement grants to support efforts in intelligence gathering, in information sharing, and utilization, technology, but also boots on the ground to do, again, the hard investigation work, supporting district attorneys in these efforts, supporting businesses that have been impacted as victims, tens of millions of dollars in that space. All of that we put out many weeks ago, many months ago, not waiting for a moment like this and reacting to it, but trying to get ahead of it, recognizing those trends. Those trend lines now are headlines all across this country. But what you saw here the last week is just not acceptable. So I, took off the suit and tie and said, I'm coming down, I can't take it. I can't turn on the news anymore. What the hell's going on? Clean it up. So we're here cleaning it up. And then the question you're going to ask is the question I'm asking, trust me, to every single person behind me. How do we make sure we don't have to keep coming back? How do we secure this site? How do we do a better job in making sure that this doesn't have to continue to happen? This is the supply chain. I know all of us are focused down on the water. It's so damn beautiful. And everybody's just focused on containers at the ports. The supply chain, that's just one part of the supply. In fact, it's a remarkable but relatively modest part compared to the multiplicity of parts and the nuances and complexity that are all of the things you see behind me, not least of which our rail system. And that's why you saw, as we were out there cleaning up, we saw memories that never were, because gifts never arrived. We saw experiences that never took place, because we saw ornaments and LED lights. And Christmas trees that never arrived. And we saw locations representing the entire west coast of the United States. Washington, D.C., not just Ontario, California. Sure, San Francisco, Orange County. Names, people that waited patiently. And their gifts, their magical moments that we're looking forward to experience never materialized. So this is serious, and so we're here with a seriousness of purpose to acknowledge that this is unacceptable, to acknowledge we have to do a better job collaborating across jurisdictions, private, public jurisdictions across the spectrum, to provide more resources and a more resourceful mindset to organize those efforts in a deliberate manner to hold ourselves to a higher level of accountability and transparency in the process and keep you up to speed on what we're doing so we don't have to all come back out here for a show where everybody's finally cleaning up this mess you've been covering the last 10 days. So that's why we're here. I don't have prepared remarks, and if I'm intense about this, it's because this gets my blood boiling. And so I'm you know, I know some of you may want to go to who's to blame. I'm not. If you're going to go there, you can press me. That's what I'm not going to focus on today. I'm going to focus upon you. What I want to press upon you, and that is, we all need to do a better job to support one another across the spectrum. But we need to arrest and hold people accountable that are part of these organized efforts. 280 people have been arrested. Should be more that have been arrested. 280 have been arrested, and they need to be held to account. And we need to go after these fencing operations. And we need to go after the back end of this, and I'll close on this as well. A lot of this stuff ends up on platforms you shop on. I promise you, all of you, some of you have bought some of the stuff that was not in those boxes because they ended up on some online platform at a remarkably discounted price. You ever ask yourself how anyone makes money at that remarkably discounted price? Across the spectrum, we have to do a better job. Final words. Just so I'm not asserting something prospectively, I want to highlight something, and that is the work Chief and others have been doing. He was just up in the Bay Area. They just arrested someone. They found that some of the product that was stolen in that Louis Vuitton shop in San Francisco, $185,000 of goods were found. Hundreds of other people have been arrested, independent of what's happening here in the rail yards. Close to $20 million of goods have been recovered. We're stepping things up. We're not sitting back, and we are not condoning what's happening here in this part of the state and other parts of this state. So with that, we're here to, of course, answer any questions.
All the arrests, are you going to ask DA George Gascon to prosecute somebody?
I think I was pretty clear about the need to hold people accountable.
Governor, we were out here a week ago, and it was actually our drone video that was viral, that was seen across the world. But when I talk to people who live in this area, or some of the officers who patrol this area, they say this has been going on for, years, but really bad in like the last 6-7 months.
Yeah.
Were you aware prior to all the viral video and all the, worldwide attention that it looked this bad here? And I guess the question a lot of people have is, why now? Why wasn't something done months ago?
Well, I don't know if you guys covered the press conference many months ago where we announced the expansion of our retail theft task force and partnerships with companies like UP. So the answer is yes. And that's exactly why we established that framework. That's why we made the announcements in Southern California and in Northern California. And that's why my budget reflects substantial increase in investments across the spectrum, not just here as it relates to the rail yards and supply chain, but specifically around organized retail theft and efforts to help cross-jurisdictionally with some of these cities and counties that are seeing that activity bleed into other cities and counties and are having a difficult time in that information sharing and data collecting. And CHP now is spending more time and energy in that space.
Are we going to also have to Union Pacific in a letter to DA Gascon, Union Pacific did blame in part criminal justice reform, no cash bail for what's happening here. To what extent do you agree?
Well, I didn't read the letter, so I don't have benefit of being able to respond to the letter. What I can say is we need to hold folks to account, and we need to focus on what we can do to be more supportive of one another. And there's a burden of responsibility, and all of us share that, and that's why I'm here, to make sure that we're getting the job done. I don't think anybody particularly cares who's to blame. They care about what we're going to do, and that's why I'm here on the scene, trying to do my part. Not just intellectually, not dialing it in, but taking a responsibility to be here today and to prepare strategies, more sustainable strategies, to make sure this stuff is mitigated and to make sure people that are organized in these outreach efforts, or rather these retail theft efforts and these supply chain thefts, are held to account.
Are there going to be like CHP officers helping to patrol the rail lines to try to clamp down on?
Well, we've provided more resources, more partnerships. There's the UP's got their special agents. We've got local police departments. We've got UPS has their own enforcement wings. So it's a deep, broad stroke collaborative. It's not just a local DA. This is with the Department of Justice, not only own Department of Justice, but to the extent that there are federal components here and there are commerce-related issues and interstate issues with the federal government. And so it's across the spectrum that we're organizing our enforcement efforts.
Governor, your retail task force.
A little bit about how 48 hours ago you decided to come to Los Angeles. What was it that made that decision happen in that way? Could you talk about that moment a little bit? And then there's also been sort of a circular firing squad of blame going on as when you come in here to referee that, and is this the beginning of that not happening?
Yeah, I don't have patience for that. I'm not even interested in that. The circular firing squad. I'm interested in solutions. And so we put up real resources, hundreds of millions of dollars. We're putting up unprecedented personnel support. We are organizing those efforts. We're providing that support, not just today, but as needed. And we're trying to structure a framework of accountability with our Attorney General. Rob Bonta is on this, and he's creating that new unit at the Department of Justice to make sure that we're driving prosecution, vertical prosecution as it relates to these organized efforts. With that in mind, no, look, I'm down here every week. Many of you know that, and consistently cleaning up encampments. Many of you have been there. I recognize a number of familiar faces, and so that's not unique. But my frustration with this in particular is the images look like a third world country. And it just made me think, why were you back 2 days later and it still looked like that? And then 3 days later, and I'm like, okay, I mean, why isn't this cleaned up? And so that's why we came down, and a lot of that work was underway, and I'm grateful for that, but it wasn't done. And so we've got to finish that job. Don't run the 90-yard dash. We still have a lot more work to do. I get it. And you will come back and you'll say the governor was here just a few days ago and live at 9 o'clock tonight. Our investigative team will follow up and and there may be those moments. And so you can run this tape of me 10 o'clock. Here we are promoting. Because not my first rodeo. I get it. It's there's a whack-a-mole component. You got to stay on top of it. So I don't want to overpromise. As you suggest, been for years and years and years. These things have been going years. I got here 3 years, years and years. And they happen all across the country. And by the way, all across the country. All across the country are those reforms that people are identifying as the reason. It was so easy. I mean, we all want the simple reason. But it's much more complex than it appears when you look at the facts. And the facts require a comprehensive strategy and accountability across the spectrum, and that's what we're offering.
You mentioned 280 arrests. Do you have information on how many of those people were
Maybe 289, as you hear the sirens behind me. I don't know the details of the arrests. That's not my. That's the police department and local and some of the county folks. I don't know. I know of the number of people arrested. I don't know in the process of prosecution where folks are. I don't know exactly where the prosecution is. And that's something with respect a governor should be careful about as it relates to the arrest, all the support and investigation that needs to be done independently and possibly and appropriately, and to make sure that any prosecution takes place is appropriate. And I'm not arguing for ready, fire, aim. I'm arguing for ready, aim, fire.
Just to clarify, are you announcing something new today, or are you saying this is an expansion of your
Well, I'm highlighting a budget that I announced just a few days ago, $255 million for local law enforcement competitive grants. I'm announcing what I announced just a few days ago in the budget, a new unit being created at the Department of Justice, the state level, for vertical prosecution to support the efforts to go after these organized retail thefts, units, gangs, whatever. I mean, again, forgive me, that word is loaded. But to go after these organized fencing operations. We also put together a victims fund. We also put a number of other supports, including support for district attorneys for cross-jurisdictional work. And so all that we're highlighting today. We're highlighting the fact that we are working more collaboratively, turning the page in terms of the approach we've taken in the past, because we recognize we need each other in terms of organizing a framework to support our efforts to hold folks to account and to secure these sites more appropriately for the long haul. And we're just here to acknowledge what all of us recognize is that this is unacceptable.
Governor, your retail task force involves the CHP, so are you having CHP officers get involved in this specific area?
Yeah.
Will they be helping to patrol? Will they be helping to
Well, the chief could talk about that.
And present the
Yeah,
cases? Are you
yeah. Why don't we have the CHP answer all your questions?
Yeah, specifics, please.
Yeah, that is a great question, and absolutely, that's what we're doing. We're doing it on a multi-layer effort. As the governor explained, we're going to have a special task force assigned with UP, with our local partners in LAPD and the County Sheriff's Department. We're going to be patrolling the area, working closely with that aspect of it on patrol. We're also going to be looking at it from an investigative perspective. We're looking at it from our Retail Organized Crime Task Force and their relationships with the private sector and the same agencies I mentioned working investigations in the complex arena where they're organized. Here we're looking for the presentable side in policing when we come down here, looking for the in-view patrolling, making sure that the citizens that live around here are supportive of our efforts and making sure that we perform the duties that we're required to do down here legally, humanely, and with as much care as possible on the policing side of it. But we have a lot of different options available to us, and it's a growing task force. It's going to start immediately right now. We've already assigned the personnel for it and the commander that's going to oversee it, and it's going to be a full-time effort going forward with UP for a 90-day to 100-day periods, and to reevaluate it at that point, to looking at what our efforts have determined and what they actually have provided and produced at the back end, and working, of course, with the private sector stakeholders. And that's probably the most important part that is unique to law enforcement. For the most part, law enforcement has worked with our own agencies and other agencies, and this one we're really relying on the private sector. They have as the governor said, a massive law enforcement component that are assigned to many of these organizations that are a wealth of information that provide us significant leads, and we're going to utilize that as well on the organized side.
But this is a new focus. This is a new
this
have already been
or the Retail Crimes Task Force has been doing that now for the better part of a year and a half here in Los Angeles. They've been very successful on many fronts, working with Union Pacific in the past on certain thefts, working with our cargo theft task force down in the South Bay, working with different components within the theft of product here that we find out in the gray market, whether it's a fencing location or on, as the governor mentioned, the platforms that we purchase all our stuff on, working backwards from there. They've been doing that consistently for the last year and a half. Now they're going to be building in a partnership with the uniform side and the patrol side efforts in cleaning up the actual theft at the point of rest when it comes to the rail yard here and the exchange of goods.
Last question coming up.
Will LAPD and the Sheriff's Department also be in partnership with this? And if so, why aren't they here today?
We are working with them right now on the investigative side of this investigation. We are reaching out to them to meet with them, to be a part of this on the patrol side of it. But they are absolutely been a partner with us in the investigative side for the better part of a couple months, working on several good organized retail theft cases.
So they will also be boots on the ground here. Because when we first called LAPD like last week, they said we only come if Union Pacific asks us to. And they said that was rare. So I'm wondering now if they're going to have a more active role in it.
I can't speak for LAPD on that aspect of it. I know that we've been working well with them and communicating well with them. What LAPD decides to do, that's beyond my
That's all time we have for today.
Well, let me, and I'll just, hold on, and then let me expand. And it's important just to highlight this retail theft effort is not unique to this location or this part of the state. And the budget includes expanding to the Sacramento region, San Joaquin Valley, these efforts. And again, one of the reasons we look forward to the partnership with the legislature to advance that. We are working through those enforcement issues, those jurisdictions. That's another reason I'm down here, not just to clean up, to make sure that we're following through and smoothing things out in that space. And making sure those lines they blur a little bit and are not as rigid as they have been. And that's why I'm grateful to the supervisor here, and that's why we're really grateful for all the support we've received from LAPD and the conversations, particularly CHP has been having with them over the course of the last few months. If there's one final question, we're happy to take it.
Governor, should California move forward with its own vaccine mandate for employees in light of the Supreme Court? passing the federal law?
Yeah, we've the overwhelming, in fact, California employers really led the nation. I'll give you some specific examples. Some of the largest employers in the country, like Google and Apple and others, put that in place well before the mandate. In many ways, that partnership inspired us as a state employer, one of the largest employers in the state of California, to put our own mandate and/or test plan in place, and we're very grateful for that leadership. We've extended that mandate to healthcare workers, and it includes boosters. A little bit of light at the end of that tunnel. The numbers in the last few days are beginning to stabilize. Hospitalization growth is beginning to slow down a little bit. The numbers that came in today, about 86,000, 24,000 of those were actually from prior days. That is a substantially smaller number than we've seen over the course of the last many weeks. I'm starting to feel a little bit more optimism. Let's hold the line. Those that haven't been boosted, get boosted. Those that haven't been vaccinated, get vaccinated. But I also want to acknowledge this in closing. 81% of all eligible Californians, 5 and up, have received at least one shot. That's remarkable. We've averaged 160,000 vaccine shots a day this last week. So people are still getting vaccinated, and we want to continue to encourage that. We want to thank them for helping us get past this pandemic. And yes, we are already preparing an endemic strategy, and I look forward to talking to you more about that over the course of the next number of weeks. The next few weeks, though, we still have tremendous strain on our hospital system, and our top priority remains keeping our kids safely in school. With that, we thank you all for taking time to be out here.
Well,
Good morning. I wanted to meet you all this morning to officially and formally introduce you to someone that you probably already know very well now, which is our new interim chief, Amelia Huffman. Chief Amelia Huffman took the office as of January 15th and has already hit the ground running, in fact, sprinting forward on a number of key initiatives to outline her vision for a more effective, more just, more accountable Minneapolis Police Department. And I'll tell you, she's already working full throttle at this point in time. She's working to expedite some of the recruitment efforts that are already underway, working alongside our multi-jurisdictional partners on a number of different law enforcement initiatives. She's working to support some of the upstream diversion work in conjunction with Hennepin County. And then in the coming week or 2 weeks, we'll also be outlining a number of reforms that she hopes to move forward in the very near future. I'm very grateful for the partnership that we have. She's got, as I've said, this deep encyclopedic knowledge that she's garnered over 27 years worth of experience within this department. She is someone that we're going to be working full-heartedly with every single day, and she's already shown herself to be a really tremendous partner. So I want to introduce you real quick to our new interim chief here, Amelia Huffman, and she'll give you a full rundown on some of the initiatives that are already underway and some of the other reforms and packages that are shortly to come. Chief.
Good morning. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for being here this morning on this very, very cold day. I appreciate the opportunity to talk with you. The Mayor has asked me to talk a little bit about my priorities in this new role, and so I'll share some of the conversations that I'm having with my officers as we look at the work that we had ahead of us. The last few years have been heartbreaking for our city, our community members, and certainly our department as well. Uncertainty, fear, and chaos have taken a real toll. And also, we in the MPD have been presented with an opportunity to find meaning and a renewed sense of purpose in service to something larger than ourselves. It's our mission to protect lives, preserve freedom, keep the peace, safeguard property, and uphold the law. We're called on by our communities to work in partnership to build a safer and more peaceful city. Truly, it's a commitment to faithful service in the face of challenges that reflects the character of our officers and our professional staff, and I am proud to serve with these fine men and women. I believe in the Minneapolis Police Department and the officers and professional staff who bring the work of the department to fruition every day, day and night, 365 days a year. As a profession, we have a legacy of foundational documents to draw upon as we craft our vision for a procedurally just community policing. Going all the way back to 1829, to the act that created the first modern professional police agency. We recognized issues of community relationships, de-escalation, conflict resolution, and public trust as clearly 200 years ago as we recognize those issues today. Some of those tenets were that the ability of the police to perform their duties is directly as a result of our ability to maintain the public trust. That we're called upon to use physical force only when necessary to restore order or to observe the law to the extent that advice, warnings, and persuasion haven't worked. And that we must maintain a relationship with the public that gives reality to the tradition that the police are the public and the public are the police. We're working together. In 2017, the department set a course to weave procedural justice through everything that we do, to honor the sanctity of life, to pursue de-escalation whenever possible, and to build trust with respect, honesty, and service without bias or favor. And this will continue to be our North Star. Policing is a sacred trust, a pledge by each of us to care for and safeguard the members of this community. That's the why at the heart of everything we do. Every decision we make on every call, every case, and every interaction. What we do is to consistently provide professional police service. From the heroic to the prosaic, our officers protect the vulnerable from danger, arrest offenders who've harmed others, comfort the bereaved, render first aid, write reports, collect evidence, investigate cases, give referrals for other government services, answer questions, offer directions, attend community meetings, and so much more. And of course, how we do our work is as important as what we do. We treat others with dignity, give them voice and respect. We're neutral in our decision making, and we're continuing to build those relationships. As we affirm our commitments to these principles, we must acknowledge the voices of those who remind us that we've fallen short of our ideals. Our urgent work is to close the gaps between our practices and those ideals that are threaded through our vision statements, ethical codes, and founding tenets. And we have 5 commitments that will guide us. Care. In the Minneapolis Police Department, we act to care for the needs of others in the community and in the department. Connection. We look for opportunities to recognize the humanity in others with our words and our actions. We recognize that community members want to know and be known by those who serve in the MPD. Communication. Our words are one of the most important tools that we have. We take the time to listen to others and explain what's going to happen, to explain why decisions were made, so that people believe that they've been heard and understood and treated fairly. Courage. Policing requires both moral and physical courage. We act in the face of risk and danger to protect others from harm. We stand up for what's right, for our purposes and the values of our profession in the face of adversity and scorn. And character. Character are our values in action. We align our actions with our department values of trust, accountability, and professional service, as well as the principles of honesty, integrity, fairness, service, and diligence. We have challenges ahead, to be sure: hiring to rebuild the capacity to do the work our community needs and deserves, addressing violent crimes, investing in our people and our processes, but it is our duty to pick up that work and to move ahead. I promise to work with our officers, our partners in community, in the city and beyond, to strengthen, support, uplift, and improve our police department so that together we can provide the service that the city needs and be a workplace where our employees can grow and flourish in strong careers. Over the coming months, I'll be working to make improvements, investments, and changes in training, wellness, supervision, discipline and oversight processes, communication, and community engagement, including adding professional expertise in adult education and curriculum development, bringing new emphasis to skills and training in the areas of communication, conflict resolution, de-escalation, and trauma-informed practices, building and staffing a quality assurance function to consistently assess our performance, our systems, and our operations to support continuous improvement, ensuring that officers have adequate off-duty time for rest, providing new training and development opportunities for supervisors to grow the skills that they need to successfully care for their teams, to improve performance and manage risk for the department. They play a critical role: teaching, guiding, mentoring, counseling, supporting, encouraging, recognizing, praising, and admonishing our employees. We'll be looking at enhancing critical processes like supervisor force reviews, identifying new opportunities to collaborate with community partners, the boots on the ground folks who are doing the work day in and day out in the community to improve the quality of life in Minneapolis. Programs such as Sisters Helping Sisters on the north side, who provides mentoring to mothers, young women, and girls. And we'll be looking for new avenues to connect young people with the police. I'm particularly interested in looking for ways to connect those young people who are interested in future service. And of course, our recruiting efforts will be with and through our community partners, including the Unity Community Mediation Team, who will help us to identify and hire new officers who are committed to the community, who want to serve, and who meet our high standards. We'll have 4 classes in 2022, and continuous lateral hiring for those folks who have experience and are providing police service and want to come to the city of Minneapolis. We also have a community service officer hiring process that is open now, and we're looking for young people, people who want to make a career change, people who may not have any higher education in law enforcement, but feel that call to public service. Through the end of the month, that application process will be open, and we hope to have strong numbers. The journey ahead will not be without missteps and misunderstandings, moments of anger and frustration, but I believe that together we can meet the challenge. Our city needs and wants effective constitutional policing, and together we can deliver. Thank you.
Thank you, Interim Chief Huffman. So the purpose of today is an availability as well as an opportunity for our interim chief to provide you with an overarching vision where she will be taking the department in the coming weeks and months. And with that, we'll open it up to any questions that you might have.
Is the department or any other part of city enterprise doing anything in regards to this trial that's kicking off today in St. Paul? Any special preparations?
So that's a good question about the preparations for the trial that's kicking off today. We are certainly monitoring, watching, and communicating with our law enforcement partners. At this point, we have made no special preparations like many of you have seen when those events have been located within our city, but we will continue to monitor the situation, and we certainly have resources available if there's anything that we would need to respond to. We have not seen anything, any evidence of threats or other events that would be worrisome from a public safety perspective.
Any other questions? Yeah, I just wondered, hi there, my name's Nina with Recruitment. I wondered what, if you could narrow, I think there are a lot of avenues of possible reforms. What are maybe, say, your 3 top priorities for this next year?
Sure. So, you know, as you could tell from the long list of things that I read, there is a lot of work that I would like us to do. Certainly strengthening our internal processes like supervisor force review so that we're really making sure that we're managing risk inside the department is a critical pathway for us. And looking at investments to make sure that we are building the most skilled, most capable workforce and ensuring that officers have adequate time for rest.
And I just wondered, do you think this idea of officers intervening, that's been a policy for a while within MPD. Do you feel that you see that happening, maybe say since May of 2020? Are there instances where that's happened?
Yes, we absolutely have had instances of intervention where one officer will see that another officer's frustration is growing and will step in to encourage them to interact with a different group of folks on the call or to take a step back so that they can manage that situation more effectively.
Okay, so there are like specific instances where that's happened?
Yes, there are.
Okay. And then also wondering about officer misconduct and if you wanted to share where the department is at in terms of just how that works, particularly if officers move on. I know there was a recent recommendation having to do with that. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, that's a great question about when officers leave the department. There was a suggestion made that we need to have a more robust ability to deal with that if they should want to return to the department. We actually have contract language that's in existence right now that directly addresses that. For folks who are seeking to be rehired, they must have left the department in good standing. And so over the past year, we have had an employee or two who were interested in rehire who were not able to return to the department because they did not leave in good standing.
And then I think I just have one more, and perhaps both of you could answer. I'm curious about how your current relationships are with the union heads or the people running the union as it stands now. Mm-hmm. And are you hopeful for that moving forward?
So I am absolutely hopeful for that moving forward. Sergeant Schmidt, who is currently the president of the Police Officers Federation, has talked publicly about wanting a seat at the table to be involved in police reform conversations, and that is absolutely happening. We are collaborating, we're meeting regularly, and we will be working on new initiatives together and bringing those things to fruition.
Do you mean in terms of what the contract looks like?
No, this is separate from contract negotiations. That we're deliberately working together to look at and engage with our entire workforce, right? Because we need every officer, every employee of the Minneapolis Police Department to be engaged in thinking about improvements to the department so that we can provide better service, so that we can build stronger relationships. And so together, the Police Administration and the Police Federation will be looking at doing that engagement work and surfacing up those ideas from all of our employees so that we can really arrive at solutions that engage everyone.
Thanks. And Kate Braddis at WCCO. Carjackings were in the 600s last year, obviously an issue that a lot of residents are concerned about. Of the issues you talked about, what do you think, probably harder to answer in a few sentences, but what do you think is the most important thing you're going to address that issue?
Absolutely. So the carjackings and the violent crime, particularly shootings, have been the top two crime issues on the minds of folks in the neighborhoods. Internally, of course, we're continuing to look for ways to invest our resources, both on duty and using overtime for high visibility patrols and crime suppression work, as well as reimagining how we are handling the flows of our investigation to prioritize those cases. Hiring is going to help. The more officers that we can bring onto the department, the more resources that we'll have to be out there in the community on the street doing that work. And so those things are inextricably tied together.
We've got time for one more.
Yeah, what are some of the biggest hurdles you're seeing when it comes to recruitment? And what sort of challenges do you see in terms of making MPD a popular place to bring in officers to?
So I have said before, and I'll say again, that I think hands down, this is absolutely the department to come to work for. If you have a passion for community service, if what you want to do is work where you make a difference every single day, where you have an opportunity to change the course of people's lives for the better, this is the department to come work for. This is an incredible department if you want to grow a law enforcement career where you have opportunities to do a wide variety of work. And we will be investing in increasing our capacity across the department in all of the things we do: investigations, patrol, beats, youth engagement, you name it, and we will be investing in doing it. So I think that the attractions to come work for Minneapolis oftentimes speak for themselves. Of course, there are more practical challenges. We are looking, of course, at compensation. We are working on making sure that we're competitive with other agencies in the metro area. And also we hear from our recruits that they have been concerned about the stability in the vision of the city for how community safety services will be delivered. I think that question was answered in the election last year, and that will provide an enormous sense of stability for folks going forward.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
United team. We're great.
Good morning, City of Pittsburgh. So we could do better than that. We home. Good morning, City of Pittsburgh. Good morning. Here we go. Today is a great day for our state and our city across this Commonwealth. I want to talk about a governor that I really come to know as a state representative, and I was so fortunate to be able to work with him. I'm talking about a governor that really loves our children. And I don't think that we talk enough about the investment that he's made in education and how he's changed education and the investment that he's made in early childhood so our kids can get a great first start. I'm talking about a governor who cares about our children. I'm talking about a governor who made sure that he made grants available so that we can reduce violence in our community. And we know how important that is, particularly as we pray for the family of yesterday. I'm talking about a governor that also wants to have responsible gun legislation so that we can ensure that our children stay safe. I'm talking about a governor who sure enough walks it like he talks it. I'm talking about Governor Tom Wolf. We are fortunate to have him. We are fortunate to have him as governor. The investments he's made throughout our region, the way when he took over the state had financial difficulties and he brought us out of that. He's been a leader since day one. And I'm so glad that he's here today. And I know that we're going to appreciate him and show him a great time. I want to bring up next our great county exec, Rich Fitzgerald.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for being here. You know, such a busy time in so many different ways. But Mayor Gainey said it so well. This governor has just been a tremendous partner for those of us in southwestern Pennsylvania. And I'm going to give some number of statistics as we go through and some of the success he has had. But yes, when he took over the state, the deficit was high. There wasn't the kind of investment in education and infrastructure and economic development that we all needed. And you know, what has been the result over these last 6 years? Well, for the first time in 60 years, Allegheny County's population is growing again. For the first time since 1960, since the 50s. And why is it growing? Because we're bringing young people in. Over the last 10 years, our 25 to 34-year-old age group has grown by 20%. The nation has grown 11% over that same time. So we've doubled the national average in young people moving here. And why are they moving here? Quality of life, jobs, cost, education, all the things that are continuing to happen. We've also exceeded the GDP of the nation in Allegheny County and southwestern Pennsylvania just about every single year. And even during the downturn during COVID, we didn't go down as far as the other places did. Over these last 6 years, the average income in Allegheny County has gone up 19%, more again than the national average. Oh, and if you bought a home, 6 years ago when the governor took office? The average home price was $130,000 back in 2014. 6 years later, you own that home, it's gone up to $250,000 on average. You pretty much doubled your net worth, your assets, just by paying your mortgage because of the growth that is happening here in this region. How long did houses stay on the market? It used to be 150 days. Now it's 55 days. People used to get 90% of their asking price. Now they get 100% of their asking price because people want to live here. And what's this governor doing is, what is he investing in the future? Education. We've got a tremendous amount of money in our building trades, in their training facilities. In CCAC, his investment in CCAC to help build a new workforce development over on Ridge Avenue on the north side has been tremendous. And I remember when this governor came here, when he was candidate Wolf, we did a couple of things when I wanted to show with this governor what we needed here in Allegheny County in southwestern Pennsylvania. I took him on a little trip down Fifth Avenue and Forbes Avenue talking about we wanted to build a bus rapid transit to link the two biggest jobs creating places in the region, downtown Pittsburgh and Oakland. Well, 8 years later, if you go out on Fifth Avenue, you're going to see all that construction that's going on as the BRT is being built and will be opened up next year. I know when you're caught in traffic, you're not happy about it right now, but it's that investment in the future in linking high-speed transportation between those two places. I also remember bringing candidate Wolf to this wonderful place, this Energy Innovation Center, which has become such a tremendous training ground and such a tremendous research and development place for our universities, for our workforce in energy in the future, all forms of energy, whether it be geothermal, whether it be solar, whether it be wind, whether it be natural gas, whether it be conservation, all the things that we do. And the governor was up here and is invested in this organization and in this facility as well. I could go on and on about what this governor has meant to us in southwestern Pennsylvania. What the governor is going to talk about a little bit is how also he's stabilized the finances across the Commonwealth, not just for us here in southwestern Pennsylvania, but in all 67 counties, turning deficits into surpluses, and at the same time investing in people, investing in workforce, investing in education, investing in our environment, investing in the things that help people and improve people's lives. I am so proud that this governor has been the governor for the last 7 years and has been our governor, leading us in a great way. And he's also continuing to do that. He's continuing to plant trees in which some of that fruit will be borne by the next governor and by future administrations. But he's continuing to invest in our future and all of us. So let me bring up, and again, thank the mayor for being here in his city, and also thank this governor for his work over the last 7 years, our governor, Governor Tom Wolf.
Thank you, County Executive Fitzgerald. Thank you for that introduction. And it is great to be back in Pittsburgh. I've been here a lot, and this is really a very important part of Pennsylvania. It's a part of my life. And Mayor Gainey, and I also like to say hi to Jake Wheatley. You know, both these guys were a very big part of my life. Actually, Jake and I worked together back when you were state rep and I was Secretary of Revenue. And Ed Gainey, when he was representing the two of them, we did a lot of good things, I think, together in Harrisburg. So I'm sorry that you're not in Harrisburg anymore, but I know you're going to do great things here in Pittsburgh. And of course, County Executive Fitzgerald and I go back a long way as well. We have worked together, and he was the first one to make me see all the great virtues in Pittsburgh and the southwestern part of the Commonwealth. So this is really important to be back here. And he's right. It wasn't too long ago. Time does fly when you're having fun, but this was under construction. This was a dream when I first came here. And it's really wonderful to see all the great things that have happened. So I'm really glad to be back, and I'm glad to really start talking about. I get a lot of bad press because I'm not a showboat, and in politics that's not necessarily a good thing, because you sort of maybe don't get people to understand and see what great things have happened. But a lot of good things have happened over the last 7 years, and today I'm going to start taking some credit for it. When I became governor, for example, Pennsylvania was on really shaky financial grounds. Like many other governors, I inherited a deficit, a budget deficit. And in my case, according to the independent fiscal office, Pennsylvania had a structural budget deficit. What, Jake? You were the finance committee chair. It was $2 to $3 billion. $2 to $3 billion. So when I proposed my first budget, it was essentially our Commonwealth was running on empty. In addition to that, the $3 billion spending deficit, we also had, we have a rainy day fund, and we have a budget of this year close to $40 billion, I guess. Our rainy day fund had around $200,000 in it. Virtually, it was empty. We had nothing. Now, I was a business owner before I came to Harrisburg, and I know what it takes to balance the books, and over the past 7 years, we've actually done that in Pennsylvania. We did it through some sound fiscal management. Yeah, the economy has been strong in the United States. But even before the economy made its full comeback, we were starting to put money into that rainy day fund. As I enter my final year in office, we're actually now in a very strong financial position. We have revenues that, if you saw the press as of the end of December, our revenues are running $1.5 billion ahead of estimate. That's revenues, $1.5 billion ahead of estimate. When I was revenue secretary back in the first decade of the 2000s, for some reason, for the first half of one of the years I was there, we had a $500 million revenue surplus over estimate. Everybody was just amazed at that. That was 500. It sort of dissipated as we got in close to the end of the year, but we never had anything like this. $1.5 billion, and it looks like that's going to continue to grow. The suggestions are that we're going to have between $5 and $6 billion surplus this year because things are looking really good, and that's across the board. Sales tax receipts, corporate tax receipts, withholding tax receipts. I mean, everything but cigarette taxes are up, I think. So things are really going well. We have $2.8 billion in the rainy day fund, almost $3 billion now. Billion, that's not million, that's $1 billion. And we have a strong economy. Our Commonwealth is an economic powerhouse with the right resources to empower growing companies. County Executive Fitzgerald talked about the great things that are happening here in the Southwest. The eastern part of the state is becoming a center for life sciences. And in the central part of the state, agriculture is showing some really interesting, innovative stuff. You know, agriculture, Pennsylvania has, I think we are the lowest, we have the youngest, in terms of demographics, the youngest farm population in the United States. So we're not only, we not only have a good, thriving industry, but it's being led by folks who are going to be around for a long time. So this Commonwealth really is on a comeback. We're home to more than 20 Fortune 500 companies. 8 companies located in Pennsylvania made Fortune's most admired list in 2020. Compared to independent nations, we would be the 18th largest economy in the world. If we were an independent country, we'd be about the same size, slightly bigger than Saudi Arabia, Switzerland, Turkey. A robust economy, strong workforce draws business and entrepreneurs from very diverse fields. It wasn't too long ago that a lot of people, especially across the aisle, would look and say, in the out years, we're doing fine now, but in the out years, things might not be so good. I mean, we're an aging state. Not so much anymore. I mean, what's happening here in Pittsburgh is an indication of what's happening in Pennsylvania. A lot of people used to say Philadelphia was the 6th borough of New York. A lot of people lived in Philadelphia who worked and commuted to New York because the cost of living and the quality of life was so much better. Now businesses in New York are saying, if my employees are moving there, maybe we ought to move there too. And so more and more, the economy of southeastern Pennsylvania is growing. So Pennsylvania is doing really, really well. And that all adds up to a really huge win for Pennsylvanians. This is the first time in many decades that we have been in such a good place financially. In fact, now, I am bragging here. I apologize for that. But I'm going to be the first governor since Dick Thornburg back in the 80s to pass on a budget surplus to my successor, the very first one.
And as county executive Fitzgerald said, I haven't done that by sitting back and just sort of saying, okay, we're going to have an austerity budget. I've also invested 28% more in education than we had in education when I first got here. That's almost $2 billion in education. Done things in the area of trying to reduce violence. Invested in economic development projects all across the state, including right here in the southwestern part of the Commonwealth. So we haven't got to where we are by sitting on our money. We've actually invested it, and we've started to realize a return. Again, a healthy national economy has certainly helped Pennsylvania. But we've done this by making smart investments. And I think what we're showing is that you don't get rich, you don't do well financially by stiffing yourselves on these investments. You don't get rich despite the fact that you're making these investments, despite the fact that you have a progressive agenda. These things are happening financially because of that progressive agenda. We have done a lot of things. We've expanded Medicaid. You know, we have the lowest uninsured rate in Pennsylvania history right now. We have 11,000 fewer prisoners in our state correctional institutions. And yes, gun violence is a problem, as we talked about this earlier in Pittsburgh, across the Commonwealth. The crime rate is actually down in Pennsylvania. So we are doing some really important things, and we've taken some of the money that the federal government has given us to make sure that we actually address some of the issues that have come as a result of the pandemic. $145 million, for example, into the restaurant industry, and hundreds of millions of dollars from the ARPA, American Rescue Plan, into things like child care, into things like education. And we have more to do. We're working right now with the General Assembly to make sure we have a major investment to help our hospital systems keep up with the increase in cases and hospitalization as a result of the Omicron variant. So we've done a lot. And again, Pennsylvania is in a much better place than it was before, and we're on the verge of doing some even greater things because we now have the resources to do what we could not do just 7 years ago. The point again is that we've got to make smart investments like this. When you invest in education, you're not doing that $2 billion. We didn't do that despite the fact that we wanted to have strong financial Part of the reason we have a strong financial result and a status right now is because we invested in things like this, investing in the people of Pennsylvania, and that helped us get to this better place financially. You can't have one without the other. You can't not invest in people and expect to get to a good place financially. I think we've learned that. I think they call that the Kansas experiment. It's been tried. It does not work. We have got to invest in lives, in people. If we don't do that, we're not going to have the strong economy that we deserve to have. Giving our children a good education is an investment in our future. It's an investment in our tax base, if that's the way you want to look at it. Making sure Pennsylvanians can pay their medical bills makes costs go down for everybody. It helps our struggling healthcare system do well and survive. In some of these small areas and underserved populations that maybe before couldn't afford to. We have an opioid crisis that is better because we have expanded Medicaid. Medicaid actually gives reimbursement for people suffering from substance use disorder. So our financial stability right now is the result of smart investments. That's really important. It protects us, these investments, and the strong financial situation we're in really positions us well for the future. We can't rest on our laurels. We are in a unique situation right now to set the Commonwealth up for a bright moment, a bright future, and we need to seize the moment. We need to continue to make generational investments that will put Pennsylvania on a path to prosperity for years to come. And what I'm going to say in my budget address in a couple weeks, we need to pay our bills. We need to continue to pay our bills. When I got here, we were not paying our bills. Remember pension collars? Now we are paying that bill. We need to pay our education bill fully, fund the fair funding formula. We need to do a lot of things to make sure that we continue Pennsylvania on this really impressive track. We are a really amazing state, and we have a lot of good things to say about us. We have a really bright future in a way that we didn't have just 7 years ago, and I am very proud to have been governor during this period of time. So thank you very much, and now I'd be happy to take questions on topic. I'll do a gaggle too for off-topic questions. So any on-topic questions? Come on, ask me some questions about how we have such a great financial situation here. Yeah.
Are you going to need more
Absolutely. Yes. In fact, yesterday, 2 days ago, on Tuesday, had a meeting with on that issue. But we continue to make really good progress on it. We are the first state to have clean slate legislation. Now, as of Tuesday, I learned we're not the only state anymore. Now, a lot of states have piled on. But the person I was with on Tuesday was telling me, was a national leader in criminal justice reform, was saying that 7 years ago, Pennsylvania's reputation was not all that great with criminal justice reform. And right now, she was telling me that we're one of the leaders in the country. And I think it's not an accident. I mean, this is where I learn about what it's like to be in politics. I need to be more of a showboat. But I was with some other governors at a conference. We were talking about criminal justice reform. And one of the issues, of course, is the prison or school to prison pipeline that has been such a troubling part of so many states in America. And we were talking about what we were doing, and this is back in the Trump administration. I mean, they were even concerned about this. And one of the governors was talking about all the great things that were happening in his state in terms of criminal justice reform. So I said, well, that's really very impressive things that you're doing. So how much is your prison population down? And he said, oh no, our prison population is up. But we're doing all these things. We have to really proclaim what's going on here in Pennsylvania. We are doing some really amazing things, and we have a lot more work to do, but these things have come as a result of, I think, a conscious effort to say we are not going to do what we've done in the past in terms of making people, making the criminal justice system completely inequitable, and do everything we can to make it so that it is just that. It's a justice system for everybody. Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you for being here. My question is, what would you say the progress is for the past 7 years as well culture for the past 17 years?
I'm sorry, what is that?
What would you say the progress would be for the past 7 years in agricultural
Here's the thought on agriculture. The Pennsylvania, and this is so true in so many other parts of Pennsylvania's economy, we're smack dab in the middle of the richest market in the world. And when it comes to food, the farm to table movement is really a big thing. Well, if you look at agriculture, depending on how you can, is our biggest industry. And we are right in the middle of some of the biggest markets for the farm-to-table movement in the world. We have New York City, Philadelphia, Baltimore, Washington, Pittsburgh. What's right in the middle of all that? There's only one place in the world that has agriculture and can actually supply those places. So we're working on all kinds of things to make sure that we can sustain and support and supply those, so that you're in the restaurant business, you want a fresh tomato. You don't want something that is canned, or you don't want something that is plastic.
Americans back to work, 3.9% of the unemployment. And then now, of course, with legislation that is pending, we hope that when we have more access to child care and universal pre-K and the rest, many more people will be able to go to work, especially as the President addresses continues to address the COVID challenge that we have that are keeping people out of work. But 6.4 million jobs versus this practically over 5 million, nearly 6 million jobs lost the year before in the previous presidency. So with that, many more people availing themselves of the Affordable Care Act and the tune of millions more people, 5 million more people. We're very proud of that. And having access to quality health care. Of course, more to come when we pass some version of the legislation that is pending over on the Senate side. We're very proud in the course of almost a year ago, well, in March a year, we passed the rescue package. The rescue package put money in the pockets of the American people, vaccines in their arms, many more children safely back to school, people back to work. It enabled cities and states and counties to pay for and support the systems that make societies work, whether it's the education of our children, the transportation of our people, the first responders, our security, food workers, the list goes on, of services that are provided by localities, counties, as well as states. They took many millions of people, young children out of poverty. The rescue package did just that. Rescue our economy, our society, and our people as it attacked the COVID crisis. As you all know, we've had a variant that has prolonged the crisis, but I'm very proud of the work that the President is doing now to make sure that people have tests and masks, and hopefully more people will avail themselves of vaccinations. More therapies are in the works, and in terms of not having to have refrigeration of the kind that is almost impossible to have throughout the world. We salute our scientists for what they are doing. Science and governance, that's going to solve that problem. So for these and other reasons, whether it's broadband or clean water, as we know in the bipartisan, the first bill, the rescue package, with taking people out of poverty and money in pockets and all the rest, that was done with not one Republican vote. There were 13 Republican votes in the House to support the infrastructure bill, and we were happy that that was bipartisan, so we could repair roads and bridges, improve public transit, secure clean water, broadband, and much more across the country. So it's a great deal to be proud of. But as with all of this, we always keep an eye on what needs to be done to meet the kitchen table needs of the American people. What keeps them up at night, we want to help solve that problem. And one of the proud things about this administration is the creation of jobs, the expansion of health care, and again, the alleviation of poverty. So with that, then we go on to what we want to do next. There's no question last night was a disappointment. I support what the President said. He's disappointed but not deterred. We will continue the work. We will follow the example of those who went before us in terms of the fight for civil rights and voting rights, not to be deterred. So the fight goes on. I had the privilege earlier this week, the beginning of the week on Martin Luther King Day, to be with the King family, to be inspired over and over again, continue to be inspired by them, to the point of their Martin Luther King's granddaughter, Yolanda, who's 13 years old in 8th grade, talking about the future, talking with her great wisdom about the future. So we're, again, always eager to do more, but nonetheless disappointed what happened. But I want to congratulate Leader Schumer for his courage, for how he proceeded with this legislation. You had to have a vote. And what was wonderful to see was for almost 2 days to hear the Democratic senators talk about the sanctity of the vote and how fundamental that is to our democracy. It was so inspiring. Sad, though, to hear the Republicans argue against the freedom to vote and protect our vote. Whatever the outcome, the fact is that every Democrat in the Senate voted for the Freedom to Vote / John Lewis Voter Advancement Act, and every Republican voted against it. The process in the Senate leaves much to be desired. If you want to talk about that, we can later. But the fact is that it was an inspiring day, and I salute the chairman for bringing that important legislation to the forefront as he brought it to the floor. And that's a way to get it into the forefront. It's so important. But again, my motto is, some of you have heard me say it, we don't agonize, we organize. And that's what we will do to, again, advance voter participation in our country. I was a former chair of the party, and our goal was to remove obstacles of participation for anyone, whatever their party was, to remove obstacles of participation. Instead of what the Republicans are doing is to put up obstacles of participation. So the fight for voting rights continues. We will not relent. The fight goes on. So where do we go from here? As we have been engaged in all of these highly visible fights, discussions, debates in the Congress, we have been working in many cases in a bipartisan way to advance legislation which should be coming to the floor in the months ahead, as soon as we come to the agreement. First and foremost is the omnibus bill. I salute our chair, Rosa DeLauro, for the work that she is doing. This has to be bipartisan, and as an appropriator myself from way back, I always say, left to their own devices, the appropriators can get the job done, and we want to leave them to their own devices, and I hope that Mitch McConnell will lead them to their devices as well. We must get that done. It is important in terms of governance to get the appropriations bill done, the omnibus bill done, to fund the government. It is now a national security issue of the highest priority, with the threats that exist out there. To go to a continuing resolution instead of a decision-making omnibus bill is to weaken our security and our stability. The Republicans should know that. So we hope that we will be able to bring that legislation to the floor before it expires. Honoring our pact. This is another security issue. It's about the burn pits. This is something that members have been working on for a while, and now, yesterday even, in fact, the Veterans Affairs Committee had around Chairman Takano had a round table with the VSOs, the Veteran Service Organizations. We thank our veterans and our Veteran Services Organizations for their input on this. As you know, many of our service members were affected by being exposed to burn pits, and we have to have legislation passed. It will be expensive, but it is the price we must pay, that we owe our veterans to make sure they get the care and benefits that they deserve. Those who are exposed to burn pits. And from our standpoint, if you were there, you qualify. We don't have to go through any torturous process to decide if somebody's illness depended on something that they were exposed to. That very important legislation. Again, we're hoping all of this is bipartisan. The Competitiveness bill. It has many names. It's about chips, about funding for chips. It's about research and development, a very big piece of that coming out of our Science, Space, and Technology Committee under leadership of Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. It's about supply chain. And it's pretty exciting, the Competitiveness bill, and we're very close to being ready to go to conference with the Senate on that legislation. Postal reform, you've heard about it over and over again, but again, it's about fairness and making sure that we have fairness for our postal workers without having the retirement health benefits be pre-funded for 75 years into the future. These are some of the items on the agenda in the very near future that have important ramifications for us. Very important in terms of all of this is what we do about any legislation we may have about the Ukraine, which is really about our security and our stability. Mr. Menendez has legislation in the Senate. We anticipate a companion bill in the House, but that's up to our distinguished chairman, Mr. Meeks, to announce. We have members have been meeting, committees of security committees have been meeting. We've had our briefings and the rest. And when that legislation is ready, whenever that may be, it could be next week, it could be next month, but whenever it is ready, we will go forward with legislation in terms of the stability and national security, whether it's legislation on robust Russian sanctions, assistance to Ukraine, again, our commitments to NATO and so forth. So that's, Glenn, let us acknowledge and appreciate what Joe Biden as President of the United States, the difference that he has made, 6.4 million jobs, that has a nice ring to it. We want more. We can put more people back to work when we have more access to child care and home health care so that more moms and dads can be in the workforce, and when we solve and crush the COVID crisis, which is a deterrent to people going to work as well. So we thank the President for his great leadership. We appreciate the leadership of Chuck Schumer in advancing the sanctity of the vote in the Senate and giving it the visibility that it would never have had without in the Senate as we prepare for what's next on our agenda. We do so striving for as much bipartisanship as possible in terms of protecting honoring our veterans, protecting our country, again, funding the governance of our country. On a happy note, yesterday, Congress passed legislation to award Willie O. Yee. You know Willie O. Yee? You know Willie O. Yee. You just did a story about Willie. Well, you come to our office later today because we'll be signing the legislation. He was, for your information, Willie O. Yee was the first black player in the National Hockey League. The Congressional Gold Medal, we voted on it yesterday. I'll sign the bill today. He was referred to as the Jackie Robinson of hockey. We can never have a meeting without talking sports, right? The House passed the bill unanimously, which honors the contribution of a sports legend who broke the National Hockey League's color barrier despite being legally blind in one eye. Is that remarkable? So we'll have the signing. Do we know what time it is today? Well, we'll let you know if you're interested. We'll let you know. Otherwise, we'll send you a picture. I'm sorry?
He had 4 goals and 10 assists in 45 NHL games over 3.
How about that? Is that remarkable? That's remarkable.
That's not tremendous stats, but that was his record.
That's wonderful. Well, good for you. Well, I'm just staying up late at night watching Warriors and stuff like that. But in any event, any questions? Yes, sir?
Madam Speaker, I understand that last Thursday you asked the Committee on House Administration to take a closer look at Stock Act violations by members of Congress, which may include stiffer penalties for these violations as
That's
well.
right.
I wanted to give you the chance to talk about just why you did that, why I think that's important, and what you say to the members of your caucus, which range from frontline members to some of the most progressive members who want to go further and enact some sort of...
Well, I don't know that. I mean, that's your version. Here's the thing. I say to my members on a regular basis when we gather in caucus, and as you know, sometimes it's hybrid these days, but anytime we have gathered in caucus, one way or actually virtually or hybrid, I've said to them, under this roof, figuratively or actually, is the greatest collection of intellect, integrity, and imagination for doing the right thing for the American people. I have great confidence in the integrity of my members. They are remarkable. So when people talk about, well, somebody might do this and somebody, I think I trust our members. If, in fact, we should have severe penalties for delay in reporting on Stock Act, then do that. I've said to the House Administration Committee, review all the bills that are coming in and see which ones, where the support is in our caucus. I think there are 2 letters, each has like 14 members signing it so far, maybe more will come, but that's what we have seen. But I do come down always in favor of trusting our members. Now, if the impression that is given by some that somebody's doing insider trade, that's a Justice Department issue. That's a Justice Department issue, and that has no place in any of this. But to give a blanket attitude of we can't do this and we can't do that because we can't be trusted, I just don't buy into that. But if members want to do that, I'm okay with that. I would add, and this is the last thing I'm going to say on this at this meeting, and I would add, do you know that the Supreme Court, now we in the House have disclosure, in the Congress we have disclosure, and we have the Stock Act, which says if you sell a stock, you have to report it in an X number of days, and if not, there's a penalty. Should those penalties be greater? Subject to review. I mean, I don't know why people don't do it on time, but whatever it is, if there's a penalty and it should be more severe, so be it. But the United States Supreme Court, where decisions are made all the time that affect our environment, our workforce, our personal freedoms, every subject you can name, at the mercy of the court, our economic issues and the rest, no disclosure whatsoever, and certainly no Stock Act. If we're saying everybody should be living by the same standard, then so be it. That's okay with me. But I don't think that the court should be let off the hook, and even the Chief Justice said recently that the impression was that there were some scandals in judges making decisions that related in a way that wasn't right. So I say, when we go forward with anything, let's take the Supreme Court with us to have disclosure. No disclosure. The Supreme Court of the United States for life. No disclosure, and certainly, therefore, no Stock Act. Another subject?
Yeah, on the BBB, the President indicated yesterday chunks of it could get passed, and I'm sure you heard what he said. I wonder what you think of that statement. And I have a couple parts here. He said the child tax credit free community colleges might drop out. And just what should we expect when it comes to the BBB going forward?
Well, let me just say, chunks is an interesting word. The President has such a commitment to the values that are contained in this legislation, the reconciliation bill. When we passed and when they were considering, and then later we passed the bipartisan infrastructure bill, the President said, I want to find as much common ground as I can in a bipartisan way when it comes to infrastructure. But I cannot limit my vision for America to what the Republicans will agree to in terms of roads and bridges, et cetera. That's important, but it's not all. So in this legislation, if we care about preserving the planet for future generations and clean air for them to breathe today and water to drink, we need to pass the reconciliation bill. So I would hope that that would be a major part of it. So what the President calls chunks, I would hope would be a major bill going forward. It may be more limited, but it is still significant. So we talked about climate. Now let's talk about health care. So important in the legislation is that millions more people will have access to health care at a very low cost because of what is in the bill in terms of expanding the Affordable Care Act. Let's now talk about child care. Child care in the bill, whether you're talking about the child tax credit, or you're talking about child care, or you're talking about home health care that might include a child, or an older sibling or a parent, or you're talking about universal pre-K. All of this lowers cost for care and is transformative in the lives, especially of women in the workforce. So we have to have, if our economy is going to succeed, as you know, we say when women succeed, America succeeds. If we're going to have the full benefit of women and newcomers, and when I say newcomers, people of color who have not been in some of these traditional jobs, to expand what that means, we have to have care at home, whether it's for children or, again, older siblings or parents. So there are big chunks of the bill that have to be contained in the bill. But remember this, that this is a reconciliation bill. So when people say, let's divide it up, no, they don't understand the process. What can we agree upon? And I'm sure that we can agree upon something significant. Call it a chunk if you want, but whatever you call it, we want it to be able to make a difference in transforming the workplace by honoring work, by respecting the fact that there are families that have to make decisions between home and work, and again, protecting the planet. So I'm optimistic. I'm optimistic. Yeah. Yes, sir. Very disappointed.
of a difficult but important reality of our great democracy. The march to freedom, through thick and thin, is never over, and we have to keep marching. While last night's vote was disappointing, it will not deter Senate Democrats from continuing our fight against voter suppression, dark money, partisan gerrymandering. Democrats are proud of the fight we held last night. The strength, eloquence, enthusiasm, and overwhelming participation of my Democratic colleagues during debate was exhilarating and shows the passion we feel about this issue. Facing an uphill battle from the start, we lost the vote. But to have not voted would have been a far greater loss. A loss for our Democratic Party, which for generations has stood for voting rights. A loss for the civil rights advocates who have sacrificed so much on this issue, and a loss for the American people and what this country stands for. On an issue this important, not doing everything we could, would have been unacceptable. Now, the bromides of the Beltway class hold we should not have held a vote on voting rights if the outcome was not certain. They are wrong. Imagine telling Dr. King not to march from Selma to Montgomery because he could not be sure what obstacles awaited him and his fellow freedom fighters. Imagine telling John Lewis he should never have crossed the Pettus Bridge because it was unclear what perils awaited him on the other side. Every member of this body who has ever invoked these great titans of freedom has an obligation to uphold their legacies, not just with words, but with actions. Senators were elected to vote. The examples of Dr. King, of John Lewis inspire us, give us strength, and show us that sometimes the only right option is to move forward. And we need to remember what this is about. With the advent of Donald Trump and his many big lies, with the January 6th insurrection, with the vicious acts of voter suppression throughout the states, and with the greedy dark money interests who fuel the Republican Party these days, this is a fight for the soul of America, nothing less. So Democrats will not shy away from an uphill fight. We will continue to face them. And I believe that the lessons of history are clear. When representatives have to take a stand, when they have to show to the American people where they are on the issues, the right side of history ultimately prevails. We know history is on the side of voting rights, and we know that forcing leaders to take stands will ultimately move the ball forward. Now, finally, I want to thank all my colleagues who came to the floor yesterday to speak valiantly in defense of voting rights, and for working assiduously for months on this vital issue. Senators Klobuchar and Merkley, Booker, Schatz, Senator Kaine, you, Mr. President, Senators King, Tester, Warnock, Ossoff, Durbin, Padilla, Leahy, and so many more. Their leadership, their expertise, and their dedication to protecting our democracy is inspiring. It gives our caucus strength, and it made such a difference. Last night was unusual and exhilarating because we fought the good fight. As former leader Alben Barkley of Kentucky said 80 years ago this November, facing a filibuster, as former Majority Leader Alben Barkley said 80 years ago this November, facing a filibuster which successfully blocked anti-poll tax legislation, quote, the Majority Leader, Alben Barkley from Kentucky, said, "I'm glad I've made this fight. I have made it in behalf of what I believe to be the broad and true foundations of a true democracy." Senate Democrats fighting for voting rights is not over. We will keep fighting until voting rights are protected for every single American. And one day, hopefully sooner rather than later, we will succeed. I yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
from diverse backgrounds, different faiths, and all 50 states. They celebrate the dignity of human life and confront the ways our society fails to protect it. This year, the marchers will arrive in a Washington controlled by a Democratic Party that has grown increasingly radical on this issue. Today's Democrats work overtime to keep our country one of just 7 nations on the planet that have abortion on demand, even after the unborn children can feel pain. Our shameful company includes China and North Korea. Fewer than 30% of Americans endorse this view, but Democrats have made it party dogma. On President Biden's watch, Washington Democrats have even turned against the longstanding bipartisan Hyde Amendment. Both parties used to agree that at least federal taxpayers should not be forced to fund abortions. Now Democrats on both sides of Pennsylvania Avenue have declared war on even this. So I warmly welcome the marchers from Kentucky and across the country. This radical version of the Democratic Party needs to hear your voices now more than ever. Today marks exactly 1 year since President Biden became our 46th president. This all-Democratic government has had 365 days to start delivering on some of their core promises. So what were those promises in their own words? Crushing the virus, strengthening our alliances, and above all else, lowering the temperature and reunited a divided country. Now remember, upon taking office, this administration had historic tailwinds at its back. President Biden inherited life-saving vaccines and a distribution system that was already up and running. He inherited a string of bipartisan rescue packages, including one that was only just a few days old. He inherited an economy that was primed for a roaring comeback. Those were the promises. That was the inheritance. So let's take a look at the progress report. Last spring, against expert advice, the Biden administration dumped another mountain of borrowed cash on an already white-hot economy. As a result, we're now being hammered by the worst inflation in 40 years. Practically everything families need and want has gotten much, much more expensive. Constant shortages disrupt family shopping. Households are being hit with soaring heating costs if they stay home, and soaring gas prices if they go out. Our economic trajectory looks shakier today than it did when Democrats were sworn in. Of course, we have continued adding back jobs from COVID lockdowns. That was certainly going to happen. But job creation has massively underperformed Democrats' own projections for job creation with their super costly springtime stimulus package. When 2021 was said and done, the country had added roughly the same number of jobs that we were on track to create before Democrats implemented one policy or spent one dime. They managed to literally blow $1.9 trillion, but only barely beat the starting trajectory they inherited. They call that spending a COVID package. But less than 10% of the money went to the actual medical fight, and that certainly shows. Americans are entering the 3rd year of this pandemic with too few tests, too few treatments, too many new cases, and too many school closures. Muddled guidance on boosters that caused FDA experts to resign in protest, and needless, divisive vaccine mandates that were not even constitutional. 1 year in, the coronavirus is decidedly uncrushed. And COVID wasn't the only epidemic sweeping American streets. Take violent crime. Far-left rhetoric and anti-law enforcement local policies have led major cities to set all-time records for homicides in 2021. Or take fentanyl. This deadly imported poison was the leading cause of death for Americans aged 18 to 45 last year. The #1 killer of Americans in their prime, fentanyl. So, why aren't Democrats treating this like an emergency? When was the last time President Biden even talked about this? And drug deaths are not the only consequence of our weak borders. Candidate Biden's rhetoric incentivized an historic flood of immigration. And then President Biden's weak policies lit the fuse. The result? The biggest surge in illegal border crossings in 60 years. 60 years. All these issues are priorities for American families. But the Biden administration spent most of 2021 focused on none of those. Washington Democrats spent months chasing a reckless taxing and spending spree, packed with far-left policies that citizens never wanted. We spent half of 2021 trying and failing to blow $5 trillion on windmills and welfare. When that effort faded, Democrats abruptly pivoted and started shouting that Americans' democracy was on death's door. They propagandized that some evil anti-voting conspiracy is sweeping America. And the only solution to this grand crisis was a gigantic partisan election takeover bill that Democrats had conveniently written years before the events which they say now prompted it. The American people didn't buy the fake hysteria. 0.5% of the country thinks election laws are a top issue. In fact, more Americans believe voting laws are actually too loose than too tight. Oh, but Democrats went all in on this obsession. A few days ago, the sitting President of the United States called millions of Americans his domestic enemies and analyzed United States senators to Jefferson Davis. Well, last night the fake panic drove 48 Senate Democrats to walk the plank on a failed effort to shatter the Senate itself for short-term power. And now Washington Democrats appear to be launching an absurd and reckless campaign to delegitimize the next election in advance in case they lose it. Sound familiar? Yesterday, the president told reporters that he might not accept the 2022 election results as legitimate if his election takeover bills do not pass Congress first. All sounds eerily familiar. This morning, the House Majority Whip followed suit. He was asked if the legitimacy of our elections is contingent on Washington Democrats passing these bills, and he replied, "I'm absolutely concerned about that." The Democrats, who preached countless sermons about accepting voters' decisions, are now saying the midterms may be illegitimate unless they win. So, America, after all of this, do you feel unified? Do you feel healed? Do you feel like our core institutions are being protected? Now, Senate Republicans have met this administration more than halfway. In 2021, the Senate built and passed a major infrastructure deal. We passed bipartisan legislation on competing with China. But beyond that, this administration deliberately chose to build their whole governing strategy around the party line reconciliation process. So the president cannot deflect blame for his disappointing first year. The American people know where the buck stops. And if our Democratic friends do not change course before long, the buck will stop somewhere else. Now, on a related matter, President Biden also campaigned on strengthening America's partnerships and renewing our global leadership. Well, how's the administration done? The administration that campaigned on restoring alliances abandoned a coalition of loyal partners with its disastrous and fatal retreat from Afghanistan. The Biden administration greenlit Vladimir Putin's Nord Stream 2 pipeline, and the Senate Democrats blocked us from sanctioning it. This pipeline will help Putin gain even more leverage over Western Europe and, of course, further isolate Ukraine. As we speak, right now, Putin has amassed more than 100,000 Russian troops along the border of Ukraine. If these forces cross into Ukraine, it will not be a new invasion or a reinvasion. It will represent a major escalation of an ongoing occupation. Ukraine's been fighting a Russian-backed war on its own now for 8 years. 8 years ago, I tried to warn President Obama that Putin is only deterred when the world imposes real costs on his misbehavior. But the Biden administration sent Ukraine non-lethal support, and the sanctions it imposed and coordinated proved not to be as tough as advertised. The Obama-Biden administration failed to end Putin's invasion or compel compliance with the Minsk Accords. Now, the Biden-Harris team must not repeat the Obama-Biden team's grave mistakes. But yesterday, on live television, President Biden telegraphed passivity and weakness, exactly when our allies can least afford it. Our president seemed to state, and I pray unintentionally, that he expects Putin to escalate in Ukraine, and in any case, Putin can do what he wants. Here's what the president said. That decision is totally, solely, completely a Putin decision. I suspect it matters which side of the bed he gets up on. What on earth does that mean? Further, the president said, my guess is he will move in. The president said, my guess is he'll move in. He has to do something. So President Biden thinks Putin has to do something? What does that even mean? Why is our president speculating like a passive observer on the sidelines? He isn't a pundit. He isn't Putin's psychoanalyst. He's the President of the United States. So will America hold Russia accountable if it escalates? Here was the message from our commander-in-chief, quote, it depends on what Russia does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion, and then we end up having to fight about what to do and not do, etc. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion. Does this mean President Biden will not actually authorize the tough response that his own administration officials have spent weeks promising? This was a moment to deliver a powerful warning to the Kremlin that Ukraine's sovereignty is inviolable, that we would stand with her people, that the cost of escalation would be devastating. It was a moment to reassure our partners in Kiev and our allies along NATO's eastern flank that America had their back. It was a moment to call for NATO's unity, not to expose and appear hamstrung by NATO's divisions. It was a bizarre and devastating performance, especially, I would add, for our friends on the front lines. President Zelensky's defense minister has already shot back, quote, this is from Ukraine's defense minister, "We should not give Putin the slightest chance to play with quasi-aggression or small incursion operations. This aggression was already there since 2014. This is the fact." I suspect our own Secretary of State, who's in Europe to meet with our allies and Russian foreign minister, was also shocked by what the president had to say. Minutes later, White House staff put out a frantic statement laying out a completely different position than what President Biden had just expressed. By then, of course, significant damage had been done. But alas, the damage can be undone. The President of the United States is never powerless. President Biden needs to clean up his remarks. He needs to clearly state American resolve and clearly demonstrate American leadership. He should call President Zelensky and NATO's allies most threatened by Russian aggression. He should rally allies and partners around the world to defend Ukraine and the international system that is being threatened by Putin. His administration should be using every waking moment right now, to expedite our delivery of real defensive capabilities to Ukraine. The President must cut the indecision and red tape that has slowed us and our partners down. President Biden should finally, at long last, get around to nominating an ambassador to Ukraine, a position that he's left empty for 12 crucial months. He should send U.S. forces to shore up NATO's eastern flank. Not if and when Putin escalates, but right now, before it's too late. He should encourage our treaty allies to do likewise. But while alliance unity is important, the lowest common denominator of NATO's most nervous members cannot be allowed to restrict American action. Whatever course other nations choose to chart, we cannot afford to let Moscow underestimate our resolve to impose serious, crushing costs in response to any further incursion against Ukraine. Our friends and America's reputation deserve nothing less.
one as far as overall best response to the pandemic. And this really goes back to how it all started for us. We got some great advice early on from the officials at University of Nebraska Medical Center who told me, hey, this is a virus. You can't stop it. You can only slow it down until you can build up the resources to fight it, and you have to protect your hospital capacity. So along that lines, we were one of the first states that focused on hospital capacity as driving all of our pandemic response. And it's been true from the moment this started back in March of 2020 to today. So we put together a 7-pillar plan to be able to address the pandemic. The first started with creating testing capacity. We set up Test Nebraska, which more than doubled our testing capacity here in the state. We hired over 1,000 contact tracers to supplement our local public health departments and their efforts. We purchased PPE for our hospitals and first responders and anybody else who needed it. In fact, we were one of the first states, or the first state, to have 120 days worth of PPE on supply. We also created a quarantine space for folks who couldn't go home for whatever reason, using dormitory rooms or hotels, so that we wouldn't have people spreading the virus. We focused on at-risk communities, long-term care facilities or meat processing, with additional attention to make sure in those congregate settings we were reducing the risk of spreading it. And then, of course, we had our directed health measures, which put restrictions in place early on, such as limiting restaurants to only carry out and so forth. In fact, part of that was to give them also tools, businesses tools to remain flexible, like allowing for carry-out alcohol, which, by the way, was the most popular thing I've ever done as governor, was allow for that. And then, of course, we got the vaccines, and that's something we've been continuing to emphasize with citizens here in Nebraska, is the importance of getting vaccines. In fact, the state of Nebraska just released a report last week that showed with our data that if you are unvaccinated and unboosted, you were 46 more times likely to be in the hospital. And if you were just vaccinated but unboosted, that you're 11 times more likely to be in the hospital. And that's part of our campaign of continuing to educate people. And that's been a key part of this throughout the whole thing, is communication. During the pandemic, we had 7 press conferences a week, 2 in Spanish. We translated our materials into multiple languages to be able to reach people. We had, as I mentioned, different groups that we worked with directly, whether it was folks who were bilingual to be able to help get the message out, community leaders and so forth, to really help Nebraskans understand how they can take care of each other and take care of themselves. And so that's been a big part of this, is doing the communication. And now, as the chairman pointed out, we've got Omicron, which is far more transmissible. And certainly, as the chairman pointed out, our experience in Nebraska is also that it is not as virulent as the previous strains were. So, for example, even though on January 10th, we saw a record amount of testing, over 28,000 tests, we saw that also we've had a record amount of cases, as I think some of my colleagues here have expressed. We're not seeing that turn into the same number of hospitalizations we would have expected, say, in November of 2020. In fact, we continue to monitor hospital capacity such that we know that, emergency rooms, for example, typically operate at 95 to 97% capacity. And in Omaha, our largest metropolitan area right now, our emergency rooms are operating about 90% capacity, and in Lincoln, it's a little over 80%. So again, we continue to focus on that hospital capacity to provide that hospital bed, that ICU bed, that ventilator to anybody who needs it. We're also seeing from our health officials who we stay in constant contact with that, for example, the people who are in our ICU beds tend to be more Delta. It's predominantly more Delta. And the folks who do have Omicron and are on, say, a ventilator are staying on those ventilators for a shorter period of time. So what are we doing here in the state of Nebraska with regard to this new surge of Omicron? Well, one of the things we're doing is to supplement the federal administration's testing that they're sending out to everybody. We're also implementing our own at-home testing that includes video links with medical professionals. And then, as I think one of my previous colleagues mentioned, importantly, links back into our health system so we can track those should the person agree to do that. We want to make sure that with that at-home testing, we're capturing that data as well. We're also doing something that we did during the pandemic, which is opening up more hospital capacity by finding spaces for people who are in the hospitals but don't need that acute level of care. Maybe they need a skilled nursing level of care and they don't have a facility right now, or maybe they just need that rehabilitation until they get discharged being home. So we're looking to be able to expand that by about 100 hospital beds in Omaha, Lincoln, and Grand Island to be able to create more capacity for our hospitals. And then, of course, we're also looking to be able to not only increase the testing through the home kits, but using the Nebraska Public Health Lab with our private partners who are doing testing to be able to help them be able to find the ability to be able to get the test done, and turn around quickly. So I see that I have already run out of time with regard to it. So, Chairman, I'll be respectful of the committee here, but happy to answer the questions. And again, thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to talk about what we've done here in Nebraska to be able to help keep Nebraskans safe without lockdowns, mask mandates, vaccine passports. We've asked Nebraskans to do the right thing. We've taken a balanced approach to be able to slow the spread of the virus, protect our hospital capacity, and yet let Nebraskans live a more normal life. And that's how we're going to continue to manage the pandemic here in our state. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. Finally, we will hear from Governor Inslee. Governor Inslee, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a joy to be here. It's a joy to be with my old colleagues. It's a joy to see 3 members of the 103rd Congress. You were rookies, now you're running America. So
Yeah.
it's a joy to join you. Our perspective, I think, is interesting because we had the very first case on January 21st, 2020. We had our first death in America, which was on February 29th. And we started this with no template. We didn't get to cadge ideas from Colorado or anywhere else. We were the first. And we made some really early decisions that I think have served us well. Number one, we did decide to follow science and the data and our public health experts, and to be very vocal against the profoundly malicious efforts to not spread the truth about this vaccine that have been so damaging. Number two, we made a value decision that saving lives was our first priority, and it should remain unwavering. And third, we made the decision that the best way we could possibly reopen our economy is to knock down the virus. Now, the question is, did those strategies work? They worked big time, and I want to talk to you about that. We believe that we saved perhaps 17,000 lives because of following these policies. I want to show you a graph that I think is instructive. If we can put up the COVID graph, if you will, on our screens. I'll look forward to seeing that. If you can get that up for us. I hope that can come up fairly shortly. Have you guys seen it? Because I'm not. Here we go. Okay, so we're looking at a graph. On the right, our deaths per 1,000 are about 133. We wish it was 0. But put that in perspective to other states, many of whom have not followed the measures that I just talked about. You'll see the national average is 256. That's in the gray bar. So our death rate per 100,000 is just about half what the national average is. But it gets more depressing than that. You look at some of the other states working up to the left, where the furthest one on the left has almost, 3 times the death rate. Think about that. And so when you look at this from a national perspective, if the nation had succeeded the way Washington State has succeeded, perhaps 400,000 people would not have lost their lives. Think about that. That's almost the number of people we lost in World War II. So these measures that we have adopted have had profound success in saving lives. And I just want to talk about the things we've done that I believe have had success. Let me start with masks. We believe this, thank you, put the slide down, I think. The most successful thing we've done is masks. They have been embraced throughout Washington. There has been very high compliance with some of our mask mandates. They have kept our businesses open. They're now keeping our schools open. And people have embraced it. And I'll tell you why. People talk about freedom. I think Americans should have freedom not to be infected by their coworker or infected by their fellow student. That's a freedom. And my state has embraced that concept that has saved lives big time. We've made over 5 million masks just available in the last 2 weeks. They're readily available and people are using them. Second issue, vaccinations. We're now at about 80%. This is pivotal because 80% of the people that are in our hospitals are the unvaccinated. This is a serious disease of the unvaccinated at this moment. And one of the things we've done has been very successful, which is we have increased the vaccination rates amongst our state employees, our hospital workers, and our educational community by making it a condition of employment. That has increased our vaccination rate from 50% to 96%. 28,000 people who are employees of mine are now protected who were not protected. And we only lost about 3% of our state employees as a result, and saved massive amount of time off from these folks who otherwise would have been hospitalized. Look, my DOT had 17,000 days lost due to COVID hospitalizations. We're saving people to keep them on the job. This has worked big time. We're helping our economy. Now, some folks thought the things we proposed would hurt our economy. If you can put up the economy slide just for a moment. Some folks posited that the things we did of masking and vaccines would hurt our economy. I just want to show you what our economy is doing relative to the rest of the state or country. If you can just put up that economy side, I hope you can shoot that one up there for us in a due time. This is significant. Our unemployment rate dipped about 1%. Compare this to some other states that took the position that perhaps they weren't willing to take some of these measures. You'll see that we have done very well. The USA average is 3%. Our economy has boomed relative to other places when we have done these things to keep this down. Brief note on schools. 96%, we're only about 4% of our schools are not in person right now. We've been very successful with our masking requirements, and we reordered our schools to go back to school in person in June, and this has worked very, very well. Last comment on testing. We have increased our capacity. We do about 500,000 tests a week through our schools. And now we have, or in the next couple of days, we're going to have, I think, a unique ability to get your tests through Amazon. So you'll be able to go online, and Amazon has helped us distribute these masks. We're moving forward on that. Last comment of how you can help. Besides sending money, which of course governors always do, that's our bottom line. But I would make a note, and I'm following Governor Polis on this. We need nurses. We need mental health treatment in our schools for our kids. This is a big time need right now. I'm proposing a whole bunch in my budget. You can help where you can. With that, look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much, Governor. Thank you so much to all of the witnesses today. Now, each member will have 5 minutes for questions. And the chair recognizes himself for 5 minutes. I have one question that I would like a quick response from all the governors and the mayor too, and that is this. And since we've been putting up charts, Governor Inslee, you put up a couple of charts. I hope that we can get a chart that I have pertaining to the state of Washington. And this chart showed something that I want to bring everybody's attention to. It's clear. And this is from the state of Washington. Among the unvaccinated, literally, the numbers are clear as to what's happening with the unvaccinated as opposed to the vaccinated. And that's a big problem for us. Now, though the deaths are less, hospitalizations not as severe, but the problem is people are getting sick and they're filling up the hospitals. And hospitals are now complaining that it's going to be a problem. These high hospitalizations are a problem for us. Now I want to know from you, Governor Inslee, why do you believe that the unvaccinated residents in the state of Washington continue to remain unvaccinated? What do you suggest? What can we do to deal with this issue? And I'm going to come to you next, Governor Ricketts, and the rest of you. I just want what you think we can do. Governor Inslee?
There we go. Yeah, well, the first thing we can do is make vaccination as easy as convenient as possible. We've done that with our MaxVax sites. We've opened up another one. And this is very important to get people boosted. Before I leave here, I want to say, look, boosting is everything right now. It is so much more effective than just the first 2 shots. So focus on the educational component of that, of letting people know the value of getting boosted. Second, we can do some of the things for appropriate parts of our community to make this a job requirement. And as I've indicated, this has been very successful, saving lives of people who are in the educational community. I believe that if you're a public servant, you shouldn't go around infecting the public. So we decided our folks would be vaccinated to avoid that and keep you from getting sick so you couldn't work for the state. And third, in healthcare, obviously, that's been successful as well. But there is an important point I want to talk, if I may, just a moment. I know this is a $64,000 question. Why have about 30% of Americans not decided to get the vaccination right now? And I do tell you, it is extremely frustrating to me to look at this fact. Of the top reddest counties compared to, or areas, compared to the top 10 blue areas in the state of Washington, you have a 6-time higher death rate. 6-time higher death rate because you're not getting vaccinated amongst people who share more of the red persuasion. And this is an enormous tragedy. And we have to ask ourselves, why is there such a disparate difference between these 2 groups of people? And unfortunately, it is because a lot of folks in the red camp have created an identity that in order to wear the red jacket, you shouldn't be vaccinated. And that is a persistent problem of identity. It's not lack of information. My folks have information coming out their ears. It's an issue that the Republican Party has created an identity, unfortunately, that has bred a mistrust of science, a mistrust of governmental actions in this regard, and a sense that you can't be a good Republican if you get vaccinated. I think this is a tragedy in our country. And I urge all my Republican colleagues to resist that. Shoot, I saw the governor of Florida the other day, didn't even want to admit he was boosted. He thought somehow that would make him a bad Republican. This is a tragedy. And it's this issue of identity. We got to get out of our teams and just help our people save their lives.
Thank you, Jay. In since I believe in equal time. I'm not one of those people who want to get rid of the equal time law. So I'm going to give Governor Ricketts equal time. And I ask the indulgence of the ranking member as I do.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. You know, as I travel the state of Nebraska and talk to people why they're not vaccinated, the number one thing they tell me is because they don't know who to believe. And I think one of the things that we all need to remember is that typically it takes 10 to 15 years to develop a vaccine. The previous record time to develop a vaccine was 4 years, and that was in the 1960s, and that was mumps. And I am very grateful that this only took 8 years to develop under Operation Warp Speed, or 8 months to develop under Operation Warp Speed. But it also hasn't given the public the time to have this information disseminated and to be digested, which normally happens with other vaccines. So I think that's one thing we got to keep in mind. I think we also have to keep in mind that there's been, even from sources like the CDC, you know, different information coming out, just start with masks. At first, we weren't supposed to get masks for people, and then we were supposed to get masks for people and so forth. So I think that it is one of those cases where we have to continue to be able to educate people. Again, that's one of the reasons why we released our report last week. I think also one of the things at this point, you asked what more can we do to get people to get vaccinated? I think that really when it comes down to it, it's going to have to be that friend, family, neighbor, somebody close to the unvaccinated person who makes the case for why they should get vaccinated. I certainly continue to go out and tell people and make the case why they should get vaccinated. As I mentioned, providing the data for vaccinated and boosted versus unvaccinated to people so that they know the risks they're taking by not being vaccinated. I personally tell people I've had people who tell me, I got the virus, so I don't need to get vaccinated. I'm like, no, you still need to get vaccinated because it'll help you build the antibodies to fight up the virus in the future. So we're going to have to engage people. One of the things we've tried to do here at the state of Nebraska is find local people and run local ads. People who have, we recognize within the community and talk about, for example, how severe COVID was for them and how it knocked them down and so forth, send them to the hospital so that people they can hear locally and know will see that and say, oh, okay, that's a local person. I understand. I maybe even need to go vaccinate. In fact, I'd say actually just a week or so ago, we had a record date for people who haven't been vaccinated getting the vaccine. So I do think that we have to continue to educate people. I think it's got to be local people. I would disagree with Governor Inslee's characterization that this is a Republican Party thing. I think what we have to do if we really want to get past this is we have to get past the partisanship on this and have to focus on, why are people not doing it? And in my experience in Nebraska, it's because people still have to have time to digest this information. And it really needs to be somebody locally telling them, hey, this is something important to help protect your health.
Well, I thank you very much. I know my time is up, but I just want to say, as I go to the ranking member for his questions, I watched over several days ago, as you know, the lead researcher for the Moderna was a relatively young African-American woman who was given credit for having come up with that vaccine. But it was interesting to me listening to her when she talked about how quickly they were able to get the final product. They had been working on it for years. They didn't have press conferences every morning saying we're going into the lab and do some research today. For years, they've been working on this and they had things all lined up. So when they got the information from China and South Africa, they were able to do things rather quickly because they had been working for a decade. And people say it happened too quickly. It did not happen quickly. What happened quickly was the end result. With that, I yield to the ranking member.
Well, thank you for that, Mr. Chairman. And I know we've got a few of our former colleagues that are testifying. I'd ask Catherine Morse-Rogers, who's the ranking member of the Energy and Commerce Committee, also from the state of Washington, asked if she could have a statement submitted into the record. So, Mr. Chairman, I'd ask unanimous consent if Congresswoman McMorse-Rogers' statement could be in the record as well.
No, without objections to order.
Thank you. I'll start with former colleague Jared Polis. Governor Polis, I appreciate you being here. And I know I've watched in your state of Colorado, you've talked about after the vaccine, how that's helped alleviate some of the health crisis in Colorado. You had said that quote, public health officials don't get to tell people what to wear, meaning face masks. That's just not their job. I know with your state, you've gotten rid of the mask mandate, no vaccination mandate statewide. How's that worked out in your state and, continue to keep your state going and protect the health of your people?
Yeah, this is really a matter, thank you, Representative Scalise, of us having a lot more tools than we had in the early days of the pandemic. In the early days of the pandemic, there was no vaccine. There was not even widespread availability of medical grade masks. The few masks we had to be used in the hospital setting. There were not effective treatments. Later on, steroids came somewhat effective, but nothing like what we have now in terms of the monoclonal, the new drugs coming online. So it's a very different situation we were in than early 2020. And so it demands a different kind of response that employs all of the above, right? First and foremost, encouraging people to get vaccinated, all 3 doses, incredibly important. If I look down for a moment while the others were speaking, it was because a friend of mine has COVID. She's in her 70s, and I think she's only alive now because she was able to get vaccinated.
And I know my time's limited, and we've all seen people who get COVID, as you mentioned. Your friend. I know a friend who's vaccinated who got COVID. Anybody who suggests that if you get vaccinated, you're not going to get it, or only the people unvaccinated pass it on. Right. That's not science, actually. That's misinformation. But I appreciate that. I want to go to Governor Ricketts because Governor Ricketts said first, for anybody to suggest that it's a political party spewing anti-vaccination information. Frankly, it was Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as candidates for a president and vice president who tried to put doubt on when Donald Trump was heading up Operation Warp Speed on what might come out of that. But it's not a political party that owns it, even though they did that. I want to go to success rates. Look, Politico did the report, I think you cited in your open statements. They ranked every single state, all 50 states, on how they've fared through COVID. And your state came out #1 as the best state to respond. Frankly, I think if we should be hearing from anybody about what to do, some governors shut everything down. Some governors have kept things open and mixed results. You've done both. You've kept things open and you've protected your people, all combined better than anybody. You kept your schools open, helping those kids, millions of kids across this country whose lives are being destroyed because of that. How did you do it so successfully? What could we replicate with other states who haven't done it as successfully while keeping everything open?
Yeah, I think it gets back to, I laid out that plan that we had, that 7-point plan. And it is, a lot of that plan also involves around the communication, just reaching out, as I mentioned, doing it in multiple languages, getting to different groups that were going to be more at risk, like our long-term care facilities. We had a plan from the University of Nebraska Medical Center to address that. Meat processing plants. We had weekly calls for nearly 3 months with those facilities to talk about best practices, to change the way they were doing things, to slow the spread there. We worked with our schools on what they could do, helping them all come up with plans for how they could get kids back in classrooms. I really want to credit our teachers who were double planned sometimes, right, for the kids in the classrooms and the kids who still wanted to be remote. So we really, and then of course, we looked at areas where we had folks who were going to come from a disadvantaged socioeconomic background and worked with community health centers, for example, to make sure that folks had access to the testing and the contact tracing and the PPE and vaccines when they became available. But it was a lot of communication to be able to get that message out. And then we focused on things such as, keeping our mortality rate down. According to the Kaiser Family Foundation, we're tied for the 7th lowest mortality rate of any state where people have gotten COVID, among people who've gotten COVID. We were one of the best states for kids in classrooms. We were #6. Politico ranked us #4 as far as kids, learning loss. We had almost no learning loss in Nebraska. And then, of course, with regard to protecting livelihoods, giving people the tools to be able to function in this new environment, giving them flexibility, whether it was waiving licensing restrictions or supervising restrictions, or providing guidance to houses of worship of how they could still have services and so forth. All those things allow people to have a more normal life. And that's what led, for example, we've got the lowest unemployment rate, not only in state history, but in the history of the United States. So it really was striking this balance among all these things that allowed us to really address this. And frankly, it gets back to Nebraskans who, when we communicated out the right thing, they did the right thing. Over 90% of our seniors are vaccinated. That's where 80% of our fatalities come from. So again, targeting the most at-risk communities is really one of the things that helped us be successful.
Thanks a lot for that, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it. Yield back.
Thank you, Mrs. Scalise. I'll now yield to Ms. Waters for 5 minutes of questions.
There it is. Thank you very much, Mr. Clyburn. I thank you so much for this hearing. It's so important. And let me thank all of our witnesses today for the hard work that they're doing to save lives. Our cities and our states, with representatives like you have today, literally have been doing the kind of work that not only saves lives, but it also helps us to understand what else we need to do in order to be of assistance to them. I am one that understands very thoroughly that resources make a difference. To the degree you have the resources that you need to fight the fight, and in this case, it means masks. It means all of the testing materials that are needed. It means the vaccinations. To the degree that they have this, they can continue to do the kind of work that they're doing. I am so worried, however, that this growing political movement by these anti-vaccine activists and pro-Trump Republicans is undermining their work. We find, I'm told, in some of the research that's done, that it is found that there's a huge correlation between belief in misinformation and being unvaccinated. This was said by a woman named Liz Hamill, who heads public opinion research for the Kaiser Family Foundation, a nonpartisan healthcare think tank. Between conservative media and GOP politicians, many Republican voters are being plummeted with bad science about vaccines almost daily. Kaiser's polling found that 94% of Republicans think one or more false statements about COVID-19 and vaccine safely might be true. Over the past 8 months, Hamill has watched as Republican vaccination rates have fallen further and further behind the rest of Americans, while Republicans tracked other groups in terms of vaccination rates earlier this year. Kaiser's research shows that now an unvaccinated person is 3 times as likely to lean Republican as they are to lean Democrats. A new analysis by NPR suggests that Republicans are probably dying at a higher rate as a result. A nationwide comparison of 2020 presidential election results and COVID-19 death rates since vaccines became available to all adults found that counties that voted heavily for Trump had nearly 3 times the COVID-19 mortality rate of those that went for Joe Biden. Those counties also had far lower vaccination rates. Counties that went heavily for Donald Trump have seen much lower vaccination rates and much higher death rates. Now, to our witnesses here today, while you talk about some of the things that you're doing, having some ambassadors, volunteer people going out, talking with folks, do you think that you could be more definitive? For example, you have someone who is advising people, and I'm going to see if I can get his name, to drink their own urine. And so when you have this kind of misinformation that is constantly, bombarding folks, it undermines all the work that you're doing. Can you get more definitive? Can you describe better? Can you have in your ads, real life information about people who are not vaccinated are dying at a rate of late. Can you put that up and out as we should be thinking about how we should do it? Let me go right to any one of our, Mr. Inslee, since you're from us and you've worked with us, you know what we try and do. What do you think about being tougher, more definitive, and using the words that need to be used in order to dissuade people from not getting vaccinated?
Well, first, I want to congratulate Governor Ricketts. He's done some good things in Nebraska. Congratulate him for some of his successes. But I do think there's just is a sad reality we have to recognize, and that is that there has been a profoundly different approach to this whole pandemic, based on whether you're red or blue. That's just a reality. And when we started this, the defeated president continually belittled the importance of this, said it's going to be over by Easter. And I remember asking him for help early on in this pandemic. He said it wasn't his job to help the states. And now we got a president, I think, who's really helping out every time we ask for help. And it started there. But I just want to suggest that this is a larger problem than just COVID. The virus of deception about our organs of democracy, there's two viruses. One is the virus of COVID and one is falsity. And that falsity is not just about COVID. It's about who won the last election. Listen, if you have one party telling their members that you can't trust government enough to even decide who won the last election, it's pretty certain they're not going to trust government when government shares the truth about this virus and the effectiveness of vaccine. And the sad truth is we have one party that has created the big lie, certainly about who won the last election, and significant mistruths for many, and I'm not counting Governor Ricketts in his camp, but many of his colleagues have continued to belittle the effectiveness of these measures. And that's just a sad reality. Now, how do we change that situation? We try to appeal to the better angels of their nature to knock it off and stop supporting and nominating candidates who want to continue to lie about basic truths in our democracy. That's the infection we have of willing to infect people with falsity. And we saw it on January 6th.
Yes.
And we saw it every day when I can't get Republicans to get vaccinated. And by the way, in my state, unfortunately, I just have to share you this. In my state, there is a profound difference in the vaccination rates between the red and blue counties in my state. It's just a reality. And I can't get Republicans enough to respond to that. So maybe Governor Ricketts can convince them.
Thank you, Governor.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank you.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Jordan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to see some of our former colleagues. I want to thank all our witnesses for being here. I first want to go to what the chairman said in his opening statement a couple hours ago. He attacked Senator Johnson and Representative Gates about statements they had made. And then we just heard Governor Inslee say that government shares the truth. That is, I mean, think about what we have been told about this virus that turned out not to be true. The President of the United States said we have a plan. The President of the United States said we would shut down the virus. Dr. Fauci and CDC and the government said didn't start in the lab. They all said it wasn't gain-of-function research. They said we'll never impose a mandate, but they did. So much so went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court struck it down. They told us that the vaccinated can't get it. They told us that the vaccinated can't transmit it. They told us there's no such thing as natural immunity. The last thing you want to do is trust what these people have told us, because everything they've told us has turned out to be misleading and not accurate. Governor Ricketts, are there more people vaccinated now than there were a year ago?
Yeah, absolutely. As I mentioned, we just had a record day for the number of people who have never been vaccinated to get vaccinated. So it's
are there more people who nationwide, are there more COVID deaths this year than there were last year?
You know, I have not tracked the COVID deaths. I heard earlier on the call there were more deaths this year than last year, but I can't tell you. I've been focused on my state. I can't tell you.
Are there an uptick in cases as we speak now nationwide than compared to a year ago?
Well, certainly in Nebraska, we've got an uptick in cases. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's an uptick everywhere. So I think the simple question is, how can that be? I mean, how can if mask mandates and lockdowns work, then why didn't they work? I mean, we've seen all kinds of restrictions placed on the American people, all kinds of limits placed on their freedom. If those things all work, how can we have higher caseloads at a time when there are more people vaccinated and more
different school districts will choose to do mask mandates, but that is up to the local school districts. We've never done it at the state level.
Do you have a mask mandate on businesses in your state?
No, we do not.
Do you have a vaccine passport mandate in your state, as many cities are now imposing on citizens?
No, we do not.
And in your state, by just about any metrics and measure, I looked at some of this prior to the hearing, you've done very well in all kinds. I mean, one of the things I noticed is you've actually had more families move into your state over the time of the pandemic, which cannot be said for New York, New Jersey, California, and DC, the hardest lockdown states in the country. They've actually seen families and individuals leave their state, move out of their state, and move to states where they actually had freedom. So you actually went up in people moving into your state. Is that right?
Yeah, we have certainly got anecdotal evidence to show that there are a lot of people moving to Nebraska for the quality of life here.
Quality of life there. That's I think I would just call it freedom and quality of life. It's a great state. I've been to your state, as many of these other places where people are moving. When COVID first happened, did you have some regulations you placed on your economy and on the citizens early on, like most of the country did when we didn't know a darn thing about this virus? Did you do that?
Yeah, that's absolutely. So it gets back to what I said earlier about slowing the spread of the virus so we could build up the capacity and ultimately get to vaccines, all with the goal of protecting our hospital capacity. And as we build up that capacity and got the vaccines, we did not need to have those restrictions in place. So we've loosened those up significantly, really taking almost all of them off in June. And then with the staffing emergency, we do have some directed health measures specifically around hospital capacity and staffing again, releasing the restrictions on occupational licensing and supervision requirements, that sort of thing, to give hospitals more capacity or more flexibility in managing their caseloads.
Well, I guess maybe one of the questions I asked too is when you did have those restrictions early on in this during the virus, did you follow, you as the leader of your state, did you follow the restrictions you had in place?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I probably had to quarantine twice. Most recently, I was exposed and had to wear a mask for 10 days.
Yeah. But this is one of the things that drive, at least the people I talk to in the 4th District of Ohio, one thing that drives them crazy is this double standard. I mean, Mayor Bowser, she had a quarantine requirement in place and didn't follow it because she had to go visit with Joe Biden after the election last year when she left her state and didn't follow the very requirement she put on her citizens. She wouldn't follow. And time again, we've seen elected officials, most often they seem to be from the other party, who won't follow the very restrictions they place on the people they're supposed to represent, and the people who pay their salary won't follow the very restrictions they put on those people. So I'm glad that you did that. Any idea, last question, Governor Ricketts, any idea how many people work at the CDC?
I have no idea how many people work at the CDC.
10,000 people work there. Any idea how many studies they've done on natural immunity at the CDC? Or frankly, at the NIH?
I'm not aware of any on natural immunity. In fact, I think we're the only major country in the world that does not recognize natural immunity.
Could you hazard a guess why the NIH and CDC, with combined over 33,000 employees and an annual budget combined of over $56 billion, why they wouldn't do a study on natural immunity? Any idea? Do you hazard a guess?
I have no idea. I can only imagine they just were not told to do so.
Yeah. Okay. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, gentlemen, for yielding back. The chair now recognizes Ms. Maloney for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for having this very important hearing. And it is great to see 3 of my former colleagues here today. Congratulations on all the good work you're doing. But I'm going to address my questions to Mayor Bowser. I have a special relationship with DC, having spent so much time there. I would like to explore, Madam Mayor, how Republican efforts to block DC statehood could have possibly hampered the district's response to the coronavirus pandemic. Throughout 2020, as the virus crisis took hold across the district and the country, DC residents and businesses received less than half the amount of CARES Act relief funds they would have been entitled to as a state, depriving the district residents of roughly $755 million in pandemic relief for a year. Thankfully, congressional Democrats, including myself and those of us on the Oversight Committee, worked with the Biden administration to retroactively restore this funding through the American Rescue Plan. But that critical funding came a year late for the residents of the district. DC residents pay more in federal taxes per capita than residents of any other state, and they have been disproportionately impacted by the pandemic and its outsized harm on communities of color. So Mayor Bowser, how did the delay in relief funding impact the district's ability to respond to the coronavirus pandemic?
Well, thank you, Representative Maloney, and thank you for your leadership and all of your support for the district. And it was a huge distraction, first and foremost. $755 million, $750 million is a lot of money for anybody, and it's especially a lot of money for us. For some reason, we're yet to figure out in the CARES Act, our state level funding, which we receive for all matters of federal funding, was limited, and we received $755 million less than we should. What we did in its place, not to hamper our building up our capacity, as you've heard all of the governors mention, we were able to tap into some of our reserves so that we could continue to advance our response. However, your efforts to get that money restored allowed us to maintain our very critical government operations and the emergency response.
Thank you. Now, also, DC's lack of statehood creates additional barriers for its pandemic response efforts. For example, governors in other states, including those with us today, have deployed members of their National Guard to support hospital staff and testing efforts during the recent Omicron surge. But as we know, DC does not have full authority over its National Guard and cannot activate them without approval from the Secretary of Defense. My question, Mayor Bowser, is how has the lack of statehood created unique hurdles